You're in an interesting position with Walmart because you're a big shareholder in Walmart, but you're also a big supplier to
Both.
Walmart through a lot of your companies.
Sure.
And you made the point over the weekend that as far as the suppliers, Walmart is really cracking down. How does that change your opinion of Walmart or your relationship with the company?
Well, I understand why they're doing it. I mean, and in significant part, I'm sure it's in reaction to Amazon. I mean, I believe that Walmart's online business, and this may be worldwide, I'm not sure about the figure, but you know, you're talking 12 or 14 billion dollars, and you're talking about Amazon having annual gains of numbers like that. So it was very just as Walmart was totally underestimated by the Searses of the time and everything. I mean, people, the idea that some guy in Bentonville with a pickup truck was going to take them to the cleaners, you know, they was beyond their thinking. And I'm sure that was the situation at first with traditional retailers and Amazon. You want to be underestimated if you're a new guy in the game. And both of those guys came in under the radar screen. But Walmart, actually with their own history and then seeing what is going on at Amazon, knows they have to play big in e-commerce. And they have certain advantages in having stores all over the country, which can act as pickup spots and that sort of thing. But they are under a lot of pressure. And I mean, they're a huge, powerful company, but they still, if you were running Walmart and you looked out 5 or 10 years and you saw what Amazon was doing, you would feel that the time to go after them was not 10 years from now, but now. And so I think partly in response to that, a year or so ago, they, maybe a little less, they went to, I think, probably all their suppliers pretty much, and in a number of different arenas said we want to tighten up the terms, either in terms of pricing or in terms of allowances for warehousing or in terms of dates of payment or that sort of thing. I mean, they're feeling pressure from another retailing form, and I think I do the same thing in their position. Mm-hmm. But they've got a tough competitor.
Does it still make it worth doing business with Walmart, with your suppliers? Did your suppliers go ahead and say yes to those terms?
Yeah, we said yes.
So you still see value there?
Yeah. Walmart is a terrific customer. And incidentally, historically, they've had a reputation for being very tough on suppliers. They have. Yeah. But they haven't been that. That's sort of a false.
So the reputation's not deserved? I mean, the reputation that they've built is not a deserved one based on their practices. They've been. They
have not. In our, you know, we sell them at Fruit of the Loom. We sell them at Garanimals. I mean, we sell them 1,000 different ways. They have not been unreasonable over the years in putting undue pressure. In fact, I would say that there's certain other retailers I can think of that have put even more pressure on in the past. But there's going to be pressure. If you're a supplier of any big retailer, you're going to face pressure. You're going to face it if you supply Amazon. In terms of cryptocurrencies, generally, I can say almost with certainty that they will come to a bad ending. Now, when it happens or how or anything else, I don't know. But I know this: if I could buy long-term puts, if I could buy a 5-year put on every one of the cryptocurrencies, I'd be glad to do it, but I would never short a dime's worth.
Have you thought about trading the futures to take a negative position on Bitcoin?
No.
You would not do that?
No. There's no reason. I get into enough trouble with things I think I know something about. Why in the world should I take a long or short position in something I don't know anything about? So, you know, we don't have to know what cocoa beans are going to do or cryptocurrencies. We just have to focus on 8 or 10 stocks that businesses, basically, that we think are decent businesses. But I do think that I think what's going on definitely will come to a bad ending. I mean, you've got virtually everybody. I have a class. I have 11 schools coming on Friday. The questions will be on Bitcoin, and I won't know the answers.
Although when we sat down, Warren, you did say, I should have announced that we were getting involved in Bitcoin this morning.
Well, that is true. I mean, if that would be much more interesting to the audience that we were going to issue a whole series of cryptocurrencies tomorrow. But we aren't, believe me. And we don't own any. We're not short any. We'll never have a position in them.
You both have made some comments about recently to us that you think prices are very high in terms of what you have to pay for a premium for buying a company outright. Is that
there's
still
probably
the case?
more competition for buying companies by people who are using other people's money and therefore have less sensitivity to price and who are willing to borrow a whole lot more and are being offered the ability to borrow a whole lot more with less in the way of covenants. And so the competition is tough on it.
And they get part of the upside and they have none of the downside.
In fact, they make money on the downside.
Yeah, so that is really terrible competition for us. And it gets worse every year.
Is that why you're sitting on such a big pile of cash at this point?
Part of the reason, of course.
It's the residual. On the other hand, I would much rather own many common stocks than bonds. And of course, I think stocks compared to bonds, and you have to compare, they are the ultimate. And we've talked about bond yields and effect being gravity. And when they're very low, there's very little gravity to pull down stocks. And that condition exists today. We'd so much rather own the business of America than get a 3% for 30 years from the government. And people are making those choices all the time in the investment world. That stocks actually, in many cases, they look like perfectly intelligent investments.
Charlie, you agree with that?
Sure.
Let's talk about some of the IPOs that have been coming to market recently, because there has been a bit of a fervor. Many of these IPOs have done very well, although not all of them. Lyft shares are under pressure. Uber comes to market this week. And Warren, you mentioned this weekend, you talked once again about how you had looked at Uber about 18 months ago and passed on that. What do you think about Uber coming to market now?
Well, because I looked at it, I really don't want to discuss Uber. And I don't have any special feelings about it than any other coming to market. But I would say that in 54 years, well, I don't think Berkshire's ever bought a new issue. I mean, the idea of saying the best place in the world I can put my money is something where all the selling incentives are there, commissions are higher, the animal spirits are rising. I mean, that's going to be better than 1,000 other things I can buy where there is no similar selling enthusiasm and the desire to get the deal done and extra commissions. That's the single best thing to buy on a given day. I mean, it's
and I can't think of a time we've ever done it.
Yeah.
Ever bought an IPO?
Yeah, never bought one.
Yeah. How can it be?
They don't even call us.
Yeah, but how can it be the best single thing to use your money for in a given day is something that they got everybody in the world out pushing it. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not saying that necessarily what we're buying is going to work out better, but there have to always be better things than one single issue. If you make one decision on investing, if you can't find something among all the choices we see that is better than something that and like I say, the commissions they've come down, I think, now on this, but I mean, the highest commission thing that a stock salesman could sell to securities was the new issue. So you have all this push behind it. We like to buy things where nobody's making a dime selling them to us.
Charlie, just specifically on some of these companies, and I won't talk about Uber versus any of the others, but a lot of these companies are coming very late in the cycle. They've had massive private capital that's been put to work to this point, and they still have massive losses and the need for more capital.
What's even worse than that, some of them have preference for each round, and so the rounds aren't really fair rounds. There's a lot of lying in modern finance.
So you're not in favor of any of these big
I don't like lying.
What do you think of these? I ask this because we have a lot of retail investors who watch and who are looking at this and they feel the excitement behind it.
Well, I didn't get any wonderful advice from us about buying IPOs.
Whenever you buy a stock, let's say you're buying General Motors, 1.4 billion shares out. We'll say the stock's 40, it's a little below that. You should be able to take out a one-page sheet of paper and say, I am buying the General Motors company at $56 billion because. And if you can't answer that question, if you can't write that out, then you'll go on to something else. And if you're buying Berkshire, you have to say, I am buying Berkshire Hathaway at $500 billion because. And if the answer isn't something you can write, You can't say I'm buying it because my neighbor thinks it's going to go up, or because everybody's talking about it on CNBC this morning, or whatever it may be.
Or I like to ride around an Uber.
Yeah, no, that's the question you answer. Now, when you buy groceries, buy everything else, you can answer that question. But if you can't answer it on something that you're involving your savings of many years for, why in the world why should you be doing it? Over time, a bunch of businesses that are earning high returns on capital are going to beat a bond that's fixed at roughly 3% for 30 years. We're buying stocks this morning, and I'd rather buy them cheaper, but I've been buying stocks since March 11th, 1942. I am benefited by going down. If I were to talk my book, I would talk it down. People went in to buy the latest iPhone or whatever it might be. If for some reason we didn't have it, you couldn't sell them anything else. They are definitely, if you had your choice between buying and holding a 30-year bond for 30 years or holding a basket of American stocks, there's just no question you're going to do better owning stocks. So it's more attractive considerably more attractive than fixed income securities. That doesn't mean they're going to go up or down tomorrow or next week or next year, but over time, a bunch of businesses that are earning high returns on capital are going to beat a bond that's fixed at roughly 3% for 30 years. And it's not my field of specialty, but actually they look, stocks generally, which are their businesses, they're American businesses, 30 trillion worth of them, and they look cheaper than generally real estate.
Is that the only thing that makes stocks look attractive right now, is the comparison with fixed income?
Well, that's what you have to do in investing. I mean, you're sitting with some cash in your pocket, you've had savings, and the question is, what do you do with it? You can buy a duplex next door and rent it out to people and do fine over time, or you can buy a small piece of farmland or something of the sort, or you can put it into something fixed income, bonds or bank deposits or whatever it may be. And stocks, if you look at American equities, American business is earning a lot of money relative to the capital put in. And the reason stocks are worth a whole lot more than they were 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago is companies have plowed back part of the earnings. With a bond, you get it all out in interest. You get your 3% or whatever it is, and that's what you have. With stocks, you get maybe a 3% dividend, but they're plowing money back, or they're repurchasing shares or doing something. And over time, that just makes a huge difference.
The reason I ask about stocks sitting at these new highs and whether you think the market's expensive is because there are retail investors who are sitting at home, and when nightly news starts talking about how the markets are at new highs, some of those retail investors who have been sitting on the sidelines think, oh my gosh, I missed my opportunity again. The last time we talked to you, you said you were still buying stocks. Are you still right now?
We're buying stocks this morning, and I'd rather buy them cheaper, but I've been buying stocks since March 11th, 1942. And I bought them under every president, 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats. I've bought them quarter after quarter. Some of the buys were terrific. Some of them weren't at such good times. And I don't know when to buy stocks, but I know whether to buy stocks. And assuming you're going to hold them, wouldn't you rather own an interest in a variety of great businesses than have a piece of paper that's going to pay you 3% in 30 years, or a short-term deposit that pays you maybe 2% or something of the sort?
Yeah, no argument. Although your concentration in the stocks you own has gotten a little more concentrated recently. There was a filing that came out not too long ago that showed Berkshire Hathaway was continuing to buy shares of Apple. That stock is also at a new all-time high last night. It's now, you own 5% of the shares outstanding of Apple. It's the biggest holding for Berkshire Hathaway at $56 billion. Have you continued to buy even since that filing?
We bought just a little. About 6 million of the shares are attributable to another fellow in the office that's owned it for a considerable period of time. The rest are my portfolio, but I bought just a little bit. I like to buy them cheaper. I mean, it's very difficult. I started buying when the stock was maybe 100. I was buying it kind of as fast as I could, and then I ended up buying some as high, a whole lot higher. I won't name the exact price, but a whole lot higher. I'd rather have it go down. For one thing, if it goes down, Apple's going to buy a lot of stock back. They're already buying stock back. And if it goes down 10%, it means they get to buy 10% more shares, and my interest will go up 10% more for spending that money than buying shares. So I am benefited by going down. If I were to talk my book, I would talk it down.
I spoke with an analyst today, Gene Munster, and he pointed out that the interesting thing about Apple is that for a long time it was a very volatile stock. It kind of traded in this boom and bust cycle. Every time they had a new phone that came out, it would push the stock higher. If they didn't have a new release, it would drop. He said that it's still 65% of the business, but a lot of people are maybe looking at it a little differently. And he wonders how you look at it. Is this a boom and bust cycle, or is there something different?
Not in the least. I don't, I like to see the new release do well, or that, but I do not focus on the sales in the next quarter or the next year. I focus on they won't tell you exactly how many, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people who practically live their lives by it. And if you look at that little piece of whatever it is, that is some of the most valuable real estate in the world. I mean, that is, Fifth Avenue will never come close to that. I mean, it is, you've got hundreds and hundreds of millions of people with loads of buying power and able to do business or learn information or whatever it may be, and it's part of their habit of living. I mean, they spend hours a day, and it does all kinds of things for them. So that real estate is worth a fortune, and it's nice to have it added to as they sell new phones, and of course a lot of them are replacement phones, but they're adding to hundreds and hundreds of millions of consumers that are never going to get to Fifth Avenue, or they're never, and you are an indispensable part of their lives. I mean, it's an extraordinary product.
So you don't even look at it like a tech analyst would, or like a tech company for that matter?
I look at iPad. Oh, you mean
just in terms of how you value this stock?
Oh, in terms,
it's consumer products.
They've got to keep having the product that this huge clientele regards as indispensable. So it's got to be the best thing that they can tell us to when airplanes will arrive, or whatever it may be, what the weather will be, what stocks are doing, a million play games, whatever it may be. And that's important that their replacement products are looked at as super desirable. But one of the things that I grew to understand was we have a very large retailing operation, the Nebraska Furniture Mart. And if people went in to buy the latest iPhone or whatever it might be, if for some reason we didn't have it, you couldn't sell them anything else. They either went next door, which we didn't want them to do, or they came back. But I mean, it wasn't an alternative. And when you have a product that is that personal, that valuable, and they talked about the iPhone 10 costing $1,000, and that a lot of money. I have a plane that costs me a lot, maybe $1 million a year or something of the sort. If I used the iPhone, I use an iPad a lot. If I use the iPhone like all my friends do, I would rather give up the plane, which is $1 million or $1.5 million a year, for something that costs $1,000. I mean, the iPhone is enormously underpriced. Now it's got competition, so you can't push the price. But in terms of its utility to people and what they get for $1,000 someplace else, you're going to have a dinner party that could cost that. And here this is, and what it does for you, it's incredible.
You mentioned airplanes and airlines, and I just wonder, are the airline stocks that you also still find attractive? Have you been adding to your positions there?
Well, we can't add. I mean, technically we could, but I don't want to go above 10%, except in rare circumstances of the security. So we own 9.fraction% of the 4 largest, and I actually have to trim them just a little if they're repurchasing shares to stay under 10%. If I could buy 20%, I would have been happy to buy 20%. But so we've got about what we can handle.
Warren, let me ask you a little bit about the news of the day. Campbell's came out with its own business initiatives, its strategic initiative today.
I saw that.
You saw that they're selling off a couple of units, the Fresh Foods and the International. Does that make it more attractive or less attractive as a buying opportunity for something that could get wrapped in potentially to Kraft Heinz?
Well, I don't know that it changes the picture a lot. I mean, presumably they're going to get fair value for that. So if they would be calculated by any acquirer as being worth X. Now it may or may not be tax efficient. I don't know the tax basis on those assets, but if they have a low tax basis on those assets, then it actually decreases value a little bit for another buyer because you've given some of it to the government in the process. But I don't think in terms of any other company looking at it for acquisition, they're probably selling the assets that those companies would have been particularly looking for. But I don't know Campbell that well.
You saying you don't know it that well makes me think that you haven't been looking it over, considering it as a purchase, because Dan Loeb would like to see somebody buy it. And my question is, would Berkshire be interested? Would Kraft Heinz be interested?
Well, Berkshire certainly wouldn't be, but that's partly because we own Kraft Heinz too. We wouldn't do any. But I think it's very hard to offer a significant premium for a packaged goods company and have it make financial sense. The packaged good business makes high returns on tangible assets that it has, but it is a tougher business than it was 10 years ago, and the stocks are higher than they were 10 years ago. So we, back in the 80s, we were the largest shareholder of General Foods. I've always liked brands, and they're very good brands, but in terms of the battle of the retailers versus the brands and the willingness of people to change their habits, probably had a higher propensity for that than 20 or 30 years ago. So branded packaged goods are a very, very, very good business in terms of return on tangible assets, but they're not a sensational business in terms of where you can be 5 or 10 years from now.
Obviously, you've watched GE for a long time. You were a shareholder for quite a number of years, from 2008 through when you sold those shares that were at $27 at that point. Big changes. They're restating earnings for a couple of years and talking about some different accounting standards that have been put into place, but it does sound like they are changing the way they account for some long-term contracts.
It sounds that way. I mean, I haven't read anything. I've just been sitting here, but it sounds like they are changing that. When you build a ship or something like that over 5 years, not that they're building ships, but you do have ways of accounting for sort of the in-process activity.
Sure.
And companies can be quite aggressive in that. They can be quite conservative in that. And I don't know anything specific about General Electric.
You would understand John Flannery coming in and wanting to
clean house.
and make sure that he's doing things his way,
sure.
Going through the entire process.
Sure. If I were brought in to run GE, which they never would do, and they'd be wise not to, but there'd be a lot to get your mind around. I mean, from the old insurance contracts to these long-term contracts and service contracts, and there's just a lot on your plate. And so the fact that you don't have it all in place the first day, or the first week, or the first month, I don't blame anybody for that. There's things to learn with something that complicated and widespread.
Okay. One thing that we got a lot of questions that people wrote in about are variations on forms of corporate social responsibility. I'll start with one of the questions that came in. This is from Tamanori Ishikawa, who wrote 2 topical questions. Does Berkshire invest or own gun manufacturers? And then number 2, actuarially, does gun ownership have an effect on property and casualty premiums? And these there were a lot of questions in this vein that came in, just given the headlines that have been out there about what's been happening with school shootings.
Yeah.
But broader than that, just corporate social responsibility overall, and some of the things Larry Fink's talked about.
Yeah, we don't own any gun manufacturers, but I have not issued any edict, for example, to the 2 managers that run money besides me at Berkshire, that they can't own stock in gun manufacturers. They can own stock in gun manufacturers. They can own stock in liquor manufacturers. We do own stock in Diageo and have for a long time, which is a liquor manufacturer. And so we haven't, but to my knowledge, we don't. I know we don't own any, happen to own any gun manufacturers. And the second point.
The second point was, from an actuarial perspective, does gun ownership have an effect on property and casualty premiums? It's not something that weighs in.
There might be some very weird personal policy that you might conceivably, but in terms of standard business, no. I don't know of any I don't know of any time it's come up in the years I've been in the insurance business.
There is a movement from Larry Fink at BlackRock and from others who are kind of stepping into this, saying that they would like to have more of an impact on the companies that they are investing in, that they would like to have maybe a little more say in what's happening. It's an arena that can get pretty fraught with potential missteps, though, because by taking a stand, you're potentially alienating up to half of your customers. So where do you come down?
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, but I've been cheering for what was going on at Wells Fargo, if I'd known about it years ago. But Wells Fargo, we do lots of business with them. They made a big mistake, and some others that flowed out of the big mistake. But Berkshire's made mistakes, and you know, I got involved in Solomon when they made a mistake. You will not find any large company that doesn't have some problems of one sort or another. I mean, and the best defense is a hotline, and we have found out more things that have been wrong at Berkshire through the hotline.
But I think this is a little different than finding out cases of fraud or wrongdoing or somebody doing things that are wrong. This is a case of investing companies, of banking companies, potentially getting in and saying, we don't agree with a particular group, be it the NRA, be it we want to take a stand on immigration, something along those lines. You do see more and more CEOs who are kind of wading into the political arena and making their views known. You're somebody who's not shied away from talking about who you vote for and who you support.
Yeah, no, in terms of politics, you know, I have not put my politics in a blind trust. On the other hand, I don't speak for Berkshire in doing that. Berkshire, to my knowledge, Berkshire, the parent company, never had any contributions to politicians, and I don't believe that imposing my views on 370,000 employees and 1 million shareholders. I mean, they don't. I'm not their nanny on that. And if I worked for Hillary, but I don't know who our managers worked for or voted for, and so I think you have to be pretty careful. If you're saying, you know, we're not going to fly on this airline because of that, or we're not going to use this railroad because of that, in terms of social stuff, because you'll find something. I mean, I admire enormously Walmart and Costco. They sell cigarettes too. I think cigarettes are good. We actually distribute between the manufacturer through our McLean company to Walmart and 7-Elevens and all kinds of people cigarettes. I think that I think it's a mistake to start getting personal views and trying to impose them on an organization.
Yeah, we have seen a lot of that just over the last couple of weeks since the last school shooting.
Yeah.
And there have been some companies.
Well, I've got views on gun laws,
yeah.
but I don't think they're Berkshire's views.
And so you don't think it's something that corporate boards should be talking about?
I think you should be pretty careful before the company takes a big political opinion and something the society has decided that they say, well, we're going to have a different view. Now, I also think people individually should very much express their views. I mean, I think what the kids are doing there is very admirable, but I don't think that Berkshire should say we're not going to do business with people that own guns. I think it'd be ridiculous.
Okay, let's talk about some of the holdings that we mentioned before. At the end of the last block, we were talking about Apple, which is the stock, according to the filings that we've seen, that you've been buying most frequently and most heavily. There are a lot of questions that have come in on Apple, and people want to know why you're doubling or tripling down on this stock at this point.
They may want to know, but I'm not going to tell them. I mean, they can look at our actions, and we have to report those every 3 months. But we're not in the investment advisory business.
Why do you like?
It's proprietary. The views, you know, those are proprietary in effect to Berkshire. They belong to the Berkshire shareholders.
Just in terms of one question that came in, there was someone who was asking about. You've long touted the stocks that you've bought into by drinking Coca-Cola or eating at Dairy Queen or doing all of these different things to talk about the stocks and the companies that Berkshire owns, but you still have your flip phone. Wanted to know if you were ever going to get a smartphone, an Apple phone. Yeah,
well, Tim Cook's asked me that. Well, the answer is just I'm out of touch. But I tell Tim that as long as I haven't gotten one, the market's not saturated. I mean, the day I buy one, there's probably nobody left after that.
want to talk through a couple of the other stocks that you all hold too. One question that came in from Kraft Heinz was a question about the announcement that Kraft Heinz just put out. This came from Ivan the K. He says, is this a sign that Mr. Buffett is scaling back his direct participation in the business? He was referring to the headline, Kraft Heinz reports retirement of Warren Buffett from board.
I wasn't on any outside board till the Heinz deal came along first. And then the 3G, our partners, asked if I would go on for a while, and I said fine. But there's 5 meetings a year. It's about a day and a half for a meeting. I mean, you go in the previous afternoon and you think, so it's really a day and a half. So if you have 5 meetings, that's 7.5 days a year. We have 2 other people on the board from Berkshire. And the truth is, I'll talk to the 3G fellows the same way. So it doesn't change anything about it. It just saves me 7.5 days a year. And I don't want to be on any outside boards. I mean, it's time consuming, and I haven't got that much time.
But it doesn't indicate any
Zero.
of a declining interest in the business.
We're not going to change a share. We've got Greg Abel and Tracy Britt-Cool on the board. We could have put somebody additional ourselves, but Alexander Van Damme is going on there. I know him. He's got a huge investment in the company. I love the fact that he's going to be a much better director than I am, and he likes to travel. They're still very good businesses. I mean, if you've got a brand, if you look at the return on tangible assets, Coca-Cola or Kraft Heinz or anything, you've got a very good business. It doesn't look as good as it did 5 or 10 years ago. In other words, there's 2 reasons, I think, for that. One is people seem to me to be a little more willing to experiment with different diets or foods than they were 5 or 10 years ago.
Some people would say healthy diets, where they won't eat things that are packaged. They think that's bad for them. It's a millennial attitude, too.
Yeah,
they won't buy some of the old brands.
Certainly, that's a factor. I think it may even extend beyond millennials to some degree. People are more, well, they've gotten used to more change in their life generally. So I would say that there's still a huge loyalty factor, but it is not as strong as it was 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. And secondly, there's always been a struggle between the retailer and the brands. I mean, you can't. I mean, that's built into the American market system. And I would say that the retailers, and they've always had private label brands. In some other countries, private label has been much stronger than in the United States, for example. And the private label brands are priced below the big brands. And the retailer, every time a retailer meets up with a packaged goods salesperson, they're arguing for lower prices and better deals. And I would say that their hand becomes stronger as the Costco's and the Walmarts and in other countries, as they become stronger, the struggle can tilt a little bit one way or the other. I think a few years ago, I think Costco dropped Coca-Cola, and that's a real test if you want to. And of course, Sam's Club at that time started pouring it on with more Coke and everything, and that Coca-Cola's a pretty strong brand, so that Costco could decide to do that. But if Costco decided to drop a bunch of other brands that you could name, or Walmart decided to drop them. I mean, the packaged good company might feel it more than the retailer would feel it, and they would come to terms faster. It's an interesting dynamic, and it's gone somewhat against the packaged good companies. They're still good, very, very good businesses.
Is that dynamic between the retailer and the packaged goods companies, is that a pendulum swing that swings back, or is this a new?
No, and not necessarily. No, I mean, you've got these German discounters coming over here now, and each company's got some muscle. And if you've been selling, whether it's Coca-Cola or whatever food you may have eaten as a kid or something like that, I mean, you're pounding. You want the consumer, because you got to win with the consumer in the end. You've got to have a product that's strong enough that the retailer has to carry it to some degree, and where their private label, even though it's priced below it, does not draw volume away. And if you take Heinz ketchup, it's very, very, very hard to take share away from Heinz ketchup. It's hard to take share away from Philadelphia cream cheese, but I could name some other products which won't, where it's easier to take share away. And the consumer votes every day, and some things are affecting the consumer, like the feeling that other things are healthier or something of the sort. Price affects the consumer, but just the prevalence, the strength of the retailer can affect the consumer too.
Is that why there's so much pressure for some of these packaged goods companies to get bigger, or for new deals to come in? Like, I'm going to take and wrap up with a lot of products, and then I have more heft against the retailers if they try and jerk me around with
you
my
don't get
brands.
if Coca-Cola were to buy, they've got the world's greatest distribution system, so they can push liquids through that. I don't know whether they could push cream of wheat, or something through their distribution system. Obviously, a great distribution system is worth an enormous amount, and like I say, Coca-Cola has a great one. And Coca-Cola, incidentally, they're selling 5% more liquids. They are selling 100 ounces of liquids per capita in the whole world. 7 billion people are drinking a Coca-Cola product, and they're drinking at the rate of 100 ounces a year. That's substantial. Leaves a lot of ounces to go, but they are selling more ounces of liquid. They've got more brands now, but they are selling than they've ever sold, and it grows year by year, and it's growing. And James Quincy is doing a sensational job on that, and first quarter even showed it. But if you've got a brand that's kind of lost out there or something of the sort, it's hard to get shelf space, and the retailer is going to stock what will move, and sometimes that involves price. But what you want to have is a product the retailer has to have. I was genetically blessed with a certain wiring that's very useful in a highly developed market system where there's lots of chips on the table, and I happen to be good at that game. Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting, and in it he had a picture of himself at bat and the strike zone broken into, I think, 77 squares. And he said if he waited for the pitch that was really in his sweet spot, he would bat 400, and if he had to swing at something on the lower corner, he would probably bat 235. And in investing, I'm in a no-called strike business, which is the best business you can be in. I can look at 1,000 different companies, and I don't have to be right on every one of them, or even 50 of them. So I can pick the ball I want to hit. And the trick in investing is just to sit there and watch pitch after pitch go by and wait for the one right in your sweet spot. And if people are yelling, "Swing, you bum," ignore them. There's a temptation for people to act far too frequently in stocks simply because they're so liquid. Over the years, you develop a lot of filters. And I do know what I call my circle of competence. So I stay within that circle, and I don't worry about things that are outside that circle. Defining what your game is, where you're going to have an edge, is enormously important.
You believe in America.
Absolutely.
You have said to me more than once, I would give up a year of my life just to know what the next 50 is going to be like.
Yeah, even the next 4 now. I mean,
why'd you pick 4?
I don't know, just number that came to me. It is just fascinating what's happened just in my lifetime. In the 86 years. I should mention one thing about reading. It was at the library here at Columbia that I wish I spent probably more time than any other student. I lived there practically, but I pulled the book out there. Happened to be Who's an American. It told me something about my professor Benjamin Graham, and then I looked up and I went to the library and I said, I want to learn more about this because I learned this over here. That changed my whole life. We own Geico now because of that librarian directing me to some other book and then following through on that. It's the chance. I read about 1/5 the pace that Bill does, but I still spend 5 or 6 hours a day reading. I mean, you can learn so much. I particularly love biography. Just to be able to live the lives of these people that have been so extraordinary, the lessons and the discouragements they face, just everything about it. So you can't get enough of reading it. And I read the book when I was 19 called The Intelligent Investor, and I'd been interested in investments since I was maybe 7 or 8, but I'd never And I'd read every book in the Omaha Public Library by the time I was 11.
So why do you think you were interested in investing when you were 7 or 8?
Because I was too dumb to get interested at 4. My dad had a very small investment firm, and I would just go down and I read all the books that he had there, waiting to go to lunch or whatever it might be, and then I went to the public library and read them all, and it just was a fascinating subject to me. But I didn't have any. I knew what everybody thought and all of that at an early age, but what Graham wrote made sense.
To investing per se, is there something about your core competence that made investing the perfect place for you to be?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't to be a pro football player. I looked. It was a question of zeroing out all the other incompetencies, and I was left with one thing,
Just the allocation of capital.
I was actually wired in a way that was. This would be something I would be good at.
So wired in what way?
I can't tell you precisely, but I've got the right temperament for it, which is much more important than IQ. If you've got more than 120 points of IQ, sell the rest to somebody else. You don't need it in investments, but you do need the right temperament. You do it. You do have to be able to think for yourself. And getting back to, the earlier question, the first question I ask myself when I look at a business is, is it important and easy what I can determine about this business? Yeah. And a lot of them don't make it. Now, Bill is looking for hard questions that plague society, and where intellect and money may make a difference. They may not for a while, but he's taking on the tough things. My job is to find easy things. I'm looking for 1-foot bars to step over, rather than 8-foot bars to jump over, But that's not irrational if you're looking at the investment universe. But reading is key. On the biography, on the book thing, you can learn so much. My partner Charlie Munger just loves Ben Franklin. You can learn from other people and their mistakes, and I find biography is my favorite.
Warren, you have often said you still tap dance to work.
Absolutely.
Because you can paint with your own colors.
Yeah, I'm as excited about tomorrow in terms of what's going to happen as I was when I started. I was having a lot of fun when I started, but I'm having just as much fun now. And when I was here at Columbia, I had this terrible fear. It was impossible for me to speak in public. I wasn't able to do it. I actually read an ad in the New York Times. I went down to Midtown, signed up for a course, gave the guy a check, and then stopped payment on the check. I just petrified. But finally, and actually, after you get through hearing me today, maybe you'll wish I'd stayed afraid of public speaking, but that's another question. When I got out to Omaha, I finally decided I just had to do it, so I gave a guy $100 in cash, and once I parted with $100 in cash, I'd jump off the Grand Canyon to get my money's worth. So, but it changed my life. But I would say this: don't fear failure. Almost everything that's turned out, I got turned down by Harvard. The best thing ever happened. Among other some good things that happened that didn't seem good at the time. Don't worry about. And don't let it eat at you or look back. Just keep going, because you're going to have some things, and forget them. Go forward.
All right, I want to go to the back of the room, right back there, wherever number 3 is.
Hi, my name is Matthew Mann. I'm a first year at Columbia Business School. Both of you had a moment where you went out on your own. And I guess my question would be, if you were to do it all over again, you're in our shoes, what industry would that be in? Where would you start your own business today?
I'd do the same thing. Yeah. But one thing, I'd be a failure at anything else probably. I'm not gonna, no, I had fun when I was in my 20s, my 30s. Now I'm 86 and I'm having fun. And so I advise students, as much as possible, look for the job that you would take if you didn't need a job. Don't sleepwalk through life, and don't say it's all going to be great. I'll do this and I'll do that, and I'm just marking time till I get to be older. That, as I've told people, that's like saving up sex for your old age. It just is not it is not a good idea. Yeah.
What are you urging them to do?
I'll explain it. Just what I'm talking about. Now, you really want to be doing what you love doing. And you can't necessarily find it on your first job,
right.
But don't give up before you find it. The difference between now and 60 or 70 years ago in the ability of really bright people, really innovative, really energetic people to get finance to do things is just dramatically better than it was at that time. So now, if you've got good ideas, and there's good ideas right in this crowd, and you've got energy, it's far easier to get finance to move forward those ideas than you could 50 or 60 years ago.
Is that because of the internet or crowdsourcing of what is it?
It's just lots more capital around and people more optimistic about people are very optimistic about business.
But better ways to connect the two, the capital and those
absolutely.
And the ideas.
It's dramatic.
Many industrial-based communities have been severely affected with higher levels of unemployment due to the increasing utilization of automation, which ends up displacing workers. What do you believe is a possible solution to unemployment arising from automation?
How technology and the impact technology is having on jobs and the demand for new kinds of skills.
Yeah, we were here in 1800 and conducting this, and somebody would point out that eventually tractors would come along and better fertilizer and everything, and that 80% of the people are now employed on the farm, and in a couple of hundred years it's going to be 2 or 3%. And what are we going to do with all these people? Well, the answer is we release them. Keynes wrote something about it in something called Essays on Persuasion. He wrote in 1930 about what a more prosperous society would become like. And he actually postulated that in 100 years, and we're now 87 years from that, that there would be 4 to 8 times as much output per capita. And he's remarkable, but he didn't quite get how it might get distributed. But the idea of more output per capita, which is what the progress is made on productivity, that should be harmful to society is crazy. I mean, the distribution may be a problem, but if one person could push a button and turn out everything we turn out now, is that good for the world or bad for the world? You'd have to figure out how to distribute it, but you'd free up all kinds of possibilities for everything else. So everything should be devoted initially to getting greater productivity, but people who fall by the wayside through no fault of their own, as the goose lays more golden eggs, should still get a chance to participate in that prosperity, and that's where government comes in.
Whether you're going to make an investment in a company or whether you're going to buy the company, what are the factors that you have to be, that you're looking for? What test? I'm
looking for durable competitive advantage. I'm looking for something that has a moat around it for a considerable period of time. And I'm looking for an honest and able management to run it, because I don't know how to run it myself. And I'm looking for a purchase price that's not excessive. But it's better to pay a little too much for something that's a very good business than it is to buy some bargain, but really a company without much of a future. And I don't know, I don't have a ability to predict with a high probability of success the future of most companies. So I'm looking for the exception. But the nice thing is, if there's thousands of companies out there, I really only have to be right on a couple. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of baseball, where you have called strikes, and the pitcher's trying to throw it to you at the worst part of the strike zone for you. And if he succeeds in getting into that corner 3 times and you don't swing, you're out. And investing, it's a no called strike thing. So I can sit there all day and somebody can throw me one company after another, and finally I get one in my sweet spot.
Both of you have chosen both wives and partners well. Charlie Munger added what to you?
Oh, Charlie Munger changed my views. He refined them in a huge way in terms of looking for the quality companies and looking for the ability to make an investment that would work out well for 5 or 10 or 20 years, as opposed to something there might be one. I call it cigar butt investing, where there was one puff left in the cigar, but the cigar was free, so you picked up these disgusting looking things and got one puff out of them and went on to another one. And that worked okay, but it was small scale, and it really doesn't build something satisfying. So he kept forcing me in the direction of saying, is this really a business we want to own for forever? And do we want to get associated? It's like a marriage. I mean, do you want to get associated with this person forever? And it's a great way to look at things. It's more fun with a partner. I mean, Charlie and I have had more fun working together than either one of us would have had individually, and we have never had an argument after working together for 58 years.
You talk every day?
Not anymore, because we know what the other guy's going to say. We just grunt. Well, my own personal thought is that every life is of equal value. And in many ways, if you have a limited number of dollars, you actually can do more for more people outside the United States. We do have greater resources here for our 320 million people than exists around the world for 7+ billion people. So if you can improve the lot of more people by intelligently spending $1 billion or any other number in other areas of the world actually than here. And coming from Omaha and having the money I have, people can say, well, why not spend it all in Omaha? You know, you grew up here and Omaha's done all kinds of things for you, and I absolutely acknowledge that. But in the end, if I've got X dollars to spend, I can make life better for more people if I can have it intelligently allocated in other parts of the world, actually, than the United States. And that draws a fair amount of criticism, but you know, I live with it because that's just what I believe.
All lives have equal value is really the driving force
Absolutely.
behind
I
foundation.
I'm an accident. I won the ovarian lottery when I was born in the United States in 1930. It was 40-1 against me. I was male. Now it's 80-1 against being a male in the United States in 1930. I was just plain lucky. My life would have been far different. Bill always said if I had been born a long time ago, I'd have been some animal's lunch because I can't run fast and I can't climb trees and everything else. And I'd be saying, I allocate cattle, you know. It wouldn't work. And, you know, I was lucky. But 79 out of the 80 weren't as lucky as I was at that time. If you go back 100 or 150 years, people got wealthy by making some money from the first oil refinery or still a mill and building another one, and Henry Ford would build a plant to build cars, and then it would be from retained earnings, which eventually turned into cash. Now you can get rich very young just by having an idea, and you can get that idea monetized and capitalized in a way that you cannot believe. So we are particularly interested in getting younger people interested in philanthropy because there are huge fortunes by people that are now in their 20s and 30s, and just think of what the potential for that group. And so this thing has worked out way, way better, including getting younger people to join us.
Are there any major life lessons that you two have learned through your personal experiences?
Well, it's a very important question. And the more you will move in the direction of the people that you associate with. So it's important to associate with people that are better than yourself, and actually the most important decision many of you make, not all of you, will be the spouse you choose. And you want to associate with people who are the kind of person you'd like to be. You'll move in that direction, and the most important person by far in that respect is your spouse. I can't overemphasize how important that is, and you're right. The friends you have, they will form you as you go through life, and make some good friends, keep them for the rest of your life, but have them be people that you admire as well as like.
You have said to me about Susie, your late wife, I was a mess until I met Susie.
I think that's understating it. Yeah, no, she changed my life. I mean, there's no question about that.
How did she change your life?
Well, I was a very lopsided, not well-adjusted person who happened to be very good at one thing, and she put me together. I mean, and it wasn't overnight either. I mean, but she just had that little sprinkling can, you know, and finally she saw a few sprouts come up.
Was it a coming together of opposites, or? No,
I wouldn't say that. We had very similar values. We were in sync, big in a very big way, but she was way more mature than I was. She was 19 when we got married. I was 21, but I was about 12 emotionally, and she put me together. And took, like I say, it took time, but it changed my life. I mean, I would not have had anything like the life I have had.
And what did Charlie Munger add?
Well, Charlie Munger is my partner of 57 or 58 years, and he's extremely wise. He's a wonderful friend. We've been partners that time, and he's strong-minded. I'm strong-minded. We disagree. Sometimes we have never had an argument in that whole time, and we never will. And
never had an argument.
Never had an argument. I will. That's absolutely true.
You must disagree on it.
Absolutely, we disagree. But
so if you disagree, how do you decide to?
Well, what he says at the end is, when we disagree, he says, "Well, Warren, you'll end up agreeing with me because you're smart and I'm right." You know, I mean, where do I attack that particular problem? But and often he is. Often
you'll figure out I'm right.
Often he's right. I have to say that. No, listen. I respect his opinion enormously. Whenever he gives it to me, I respect Bill's opinion. I mean, it's more fun doing things with partners. I mean, the most fun is obviously a marriage partner, and that's the most important relationship. But having a business partner, if I'd done everything I'd done, it wouldn't have worked out this way. But let's say I got double the results. It's been more fun doing it with Charlie.
Are you interested in technology?
I don't have enough. I don't think I have a natural bent that way to start with, and I'd be so far behind. I never would catch up with people that have been working on it, and it would not be a game I would be winning.
It is a principal criteria for you understanding the business.
Yeah, I have to understand the business, and there are lots of businesses that I don't understand. Some of them may be almost ununderstandable, and others are just outside my sphere of confidence.
But you do have people now that do have that kind of expertise, or you have brought in.
I have two people who themselves have different circles of competence, but they aren't chosen because they have a different circle or anything. There's a lot of overlap. There's overlap between them, and the important thing, you know, is not how. It's nice to have a huge circle of competence. It's much more important to know where the limits are of it.
1 million, 2 million, 3 million. Seems to be working. I'd like to just say a few words preliminarily, and then the highlight for me will be getting your questions in a few minutes, because I want to talk about what's on your mind. I urge you to throw hard balls. It's more fun for me if you put a little speed on the pitches as they come in. You can ask about anything except last week's Texas A&M game. That's off limits. We have a couple of men here from SunTrust. I was just up at the Coke meeting, and I sit next to Jimmy Williams there, who ran SunTrust for many years, and he wanted to be sure that I wore this SunTrust shirt down here. I've tried to get sponsorship on the senior golf tour. I haven't had much luck, but now on the Bankers tour, I'm doing a little bit better. And he says I get a percentage of the increase in deposits from Gainesville. So I'll go out for SunTrust, dear old SunTrust. I would like to talk for just 1 minute to the students about your future when you leave here, because you're going to learn a tremendous amount about investments, and you'll learn enough to do well. You've all got the IQ to do well. You've all got the initiative and energy to do well, or you wouldn't be here. And most of you will succeed in meeting your aspirations. But in determining whether you succeed, there's more to it than intellect and energy. And I'd like to talk for just a second about that. In fact, there was a fellow that Pete Kiewit in Omaha used to say that he looked for 3 things in hiring people. Look for integrity, intelligence, and energy. And he said if that person didn't have the first 2, that the latter 2 would kill him. Because if they don't have integrity, you want them dumb and lazy. You don't want them smart and energetic. And I'd really like to talk about that first one, because we know you've got the second 2. And play along with me in a little game for just a second in terms of thinking about that question. You've all been here, I guess almost all of your second-year MBAs, and you've gotten to know your classmates. And think for a moment that I granted you the right to buy 10% of one of your classmates for the rest of his or her lifetime. Now, you can't pick one with a rich father. That doesn't count. I mean, you've got to pick somebody who's going to do it on their own merit. And I gave you an hour to think about it. Which one are you going to pick among all your classmates as to the one you want to own 10% of for the rest of their lifetime? Are you going to give them an IQ test? Pick the one with the highest IQ? I doubt it. Are you going to pick the one with the best grades? I doubt it. You're not even going to pick the most energetic one necessarily. You're the one that displays the most initiative. But you're going to start looking for qualitative factors in addition to, because everybody's got enough brains there and enough energy.
And I would say that if you thought about it for an hour, and decided who you're going to place that bet on, you'd probably pick the one who you responded the best to, because the one that was going to have the leadership qualities, the ones who was going to be able to get other people to carry out their interests. And that would be the person who was generous and honest and who gave credit to other people even for their own ideas, all kinds of qualities like that. And you could write down those qualities that you admire in this other person, whoever you admire most in the class. And then I would throw in a hooker. I would say as part of owning 10% of this person, you had to agree to go short 10% of somebody else in the class. That's more fun, isn't it? And you think, well, now who do I want to go short of? And again, you wouldn't pick the person with the lowest IQ you would start thinking about the person really who turned you off for one reason or another. I mean, they had various qualities, quite apart from their academic achievement, but they had various qualities. In the end, you shouldn't really want to be around them, and other people didn't want to be around them. And what were the qualities that lead to that? Well, there'd be a whole bunch of things. You know, but it's the person who's egotistical, the person who's greedy, the person who's slightly dishonest, cuts corners, all of these qualities. And you can write those down on the right-hand side of the page. And when you look at that, we'll just, I don't know which one I'm using. Can you hear me okay with this? Yeah, fine. Yeah.
The microphone on the side. Just
What do I do with it?
It just came loose.
Oh, it just came loose, okay. You can see why I avoid technology. Chewing gum is about as far as I get. As you looked at those qualities on the left and right-hand side, there's one interesting thing about them. It's not the ability to throw a football 60 yards. It's not the ability to run the 100-yard dash in 9.3. It's not being the best-looking person in the class. They're all qualities that if you really want to have the ones on the left-hand side, you can have them. I mean, they're qualities of behavior, temperament, character that are achievable. They're not forbidden to anybody in this group. And if you look at the qualities on the right-hand side, the ones that you find turn you off in other people, there's not a quality there that you have to have. If you have it, you can get rid of it. And you can get rid of it a lot easier at your age than you can at my age, because most behavior is habitual. And they say the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And there's no question about it. I see people with these self-destructive behavior patterns at my age or even 10 or 20 years younger, and they really are entrapped by them. They go around and they do things that turn off other people right and left. And they don't need to be that way, but by a certain point they get so they can hardly change it. But at your age, you can have any habits, any patterns of behavior that you wish. It's simply a question of which you decide. And why not decide the ones that... I mean, if you like, Ben Graham did this, and Ben Franklin did it before him, but Ben Graham in his low teens looked around and he looked at the people he admired, and he said, you know, I want to be admired, so why don't I just behave like them? And he found there was nothing impossible about behaving like them. And similarly, he did the same thing on the reverse side in terms of getting rid of those qualities. So I would suggest that if you write those qualities down and think about them a little while and make them habitual, you will be the one that you want to buy 10% of when you get all through. And the beauty of it is you already own 100% and you're stuck with it. So you might as well be that person as somebody else. Well, that's a short little sermon. So let's get on to what you're interested in. And like I say, you can go all over the lot. So I don't know exactly how we're going to handle this, but let's start with a hand here someplace or other. Where do we go with the first one? Yeah, right here.
Your thoughts about Japan.
My thoughts about Japan? I'm not a macro guy. Now, I say to myself, Berkshire Hathaway can borrow money for 10 years at 1% in Japan now. 1%. And I say to myself, gee, I took Graham's class 45 years ago, and I've been working hard at this thing all my life. Maybe I can earn more than 1%, you know, if I really worked hard at it. 1% annually. It doesn't seem impossible, does it? So I wouldn't want to get involved in currency risk, so I'd have to do it in something that was yen denominated. So I have to be in Japanese real estate or a Japanese business or something of the sort, and all I have to do is beat 1%. And that's all the money's going to cost me, and I can get it for 10 years. So far, I haven't found anything. It's kind of interesting. The Japanese companies earn very low returns on equity, and they have a bunch of businesses that earn 4, 5, 6% on equity, and it's very hard to earn a lot as an investor when the business you're in doesn't earn very much money. Now some people do it. In fact, I've got a friend, Walter Schloss, who worked with Graham at the same time I did. And it was the first way I went at stocks, to buy stocks selling way below working capital, very cheap quantitative stocks. I call it the cigar butt approach to investing, is that you walk down the street and you look around for a cigar butt someplace, and you finally see one, and it's soggy and kind of repulsive, but there's one puff left in it. So you pick it up, and the puff is free. I mean, it's a cigar butt stock. I mean, you get one free puff out of it, and then you throw it away and you walk down the street and try and find another one. I mean, it's not elegant. But it works. You know, if you're looking for a free puff, it works. Those are low-return businesses. But time is the friend of the wonderful business. It's the enemy of the lousy business. If you're in a lousy business for a long time, you're going to get a lousy result, even if you buy it cheap. If you're in a wonderful business for a long time, even if you pay a little too much going in, you're going to get a wonderful result if you stay in a long time. I find very few wonderful businesses in Japan at present now. They may change the culture in some way so that managements get more stockholder responsive over there and returns are higher. But at the present time, you'll find a very lot of low-return businesses. And that was true even when the Japanese economy was booming. I mean, it's amazing. They had an incredible market without incredible companies. They were incredible in terms of doing a lot of business, but they weren't incredible in terms of the return on equity that they achieved. And that finally caught up with them. So we have so far done nothing there. But as long as money's 1%, I'll keep looking. I mean, yeah.
You were rumored to be one of the rescue buyers of long-term capital. What was the play there? What did you see?
Well, there's a story in the current Fortune magazine, one has Rupert Murdoch's picture on the cover, that tells the whole story of our involvement. It's kind of an interesting story because it's a long story, so I won't go into all the background of it, but I got the really serious call about long-term capital probably, 4 weeks ago this Friday, whenever it was my granddaughter. I got it in mid-afternoon, and my granddaughter was having her birthday party that evening, and then I was flying that night to Seattle to go on a 12-day trip with Gates to Alaska in a private train, all kinds of things where I was really out of communication. But I got this call on a Friday afternoon saying that things were really getting serious there. I'd had some other calls before that the article gets into a few weeks earlier. I know those people, most of them pretty well. So a lot of them were at Solomon when I was there. And the place was imploding, and the Fed was sending people up that weekend. And so between that Friday and the following Wednesday, when the New York Fed, in effect, orchestrated a rescue effort, but without any federal money involved, I was quite active, but I was having this terrible time because we were sailing up through these canyons, which held no interest for me whatsoever, in Alaska. And the captain would say, you know, if we just steer over here, we might see some bears and whales. And I said, steer where you get a good satellite connection, because I want. So it was. In fact, there's a picture, unfortunately, where I've got my Old Faithful is going off behind me, and I've got my back to it. I'm on the phone, which was the people in the group thought it was kind of funny the way I was working the phone. But we put in a bid on Wednesday morning. By then I was in Bozeman, Montana, and I talked to Bill McDonough, the head of the New York Fed, about 10 o'clock. They were having a meeting of the bankers at 10 o'clock that morning in New York, and I caught him right. We actually delivered a message to him. He called me out there in Wyoming a little bit before 10 New York time, and we made a bid. It was because it was being done at a long distance and everything. It was really the outline of a bid, but in the end, it was a bid for $250 million, essentially for the net assets of. But we would have put in $3.75 billion on top of that, and it would have been $3 billion from Berkshire Hathaway, $700 million from AIG, and $300 million from Goldman Sachs. And we submitted that, but we put a very short time fuse on it, because when you're bidding on $100 billion worth of securities that are moving around, you don't want to leave a fixed price bid out there very long. Plus, we were worried about it getting shopped. In the end, the bankers made the deal, and. But it was an interesting period. The whole long-term capital management, and I hope most of you are familiar with it, but the whole story is really fascinating, because if you take John Meriwether and Eric Rosenfeld, Larry Hillenbrand, Greg Hawkins, Victor Agani, the two Nobel Prize winners, Merton and Scholes, if you take the 16 of them, they probably have as high an average IQ as any 16 people working together in one business in the country, including at Microsoft or wherever you want to name. So there's an incredible amount of intellect in that room. Now you combine that with the fact that those 16 had extensive experience in the field they were operating. I mean, this was not a bunch of guys who had made their money, selling men's clothing and then all of a sudden went into the securities business or anything. They'd had in aggregate, the 16 had probably had 350 or 400 years of experience doing exactly what they were doing. And then you throw in the third factor, that most of them had virtually all of their very substantial net worths in the business. So they had their own money up, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money up, super high intellect, working in a field they knew, and essentially they went broke. And that to me is absolutely fascinating. I mean, if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Why Smart People Do Dumb Things. My partner says it should be autobiographical, but but this might be an interesting illustration. And these are perfectly decent guys. I respect them, and they helped me out when I had problems at Solomon, and so they're not bad people at all. But to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. And that's foolish. That is just plain foolish. It doesn't make any difference what your IQ is. If you risk something that is important to you for something that is unimportant to you, it just does not make any sense. I don't care whether the odds are 100 to 1 that you succeed or 1,000 to 1 that you succeed. If you hand me a gun with 1,000 chambers, 1,000,000 chambers in it, and there's a bullet in one chamber, and you said, put it up your temple, how much do you want to be paid to pull it once? I'm not going to pull it. You can name any sum you want, but it doesn't do anything for me on the upside, and I think the downside's fairly clear. So I'm not interested in that kind of a game, and yet people do it financially and without thinking about it very much. There was a great book. It wasn't a great book. It was a great title. There was a lousy book written once with a great title by Walter Gutman. The title was You Only Have to Get Rich Once. Now, that seems pretty fundamental, doesn't it? What difference if you've got $100 million at the start of the year and you're going to make 10% if you're unleveraged and 20% if you're leveraged 99 times out of 100? What difference does it make at the end of the year whether you've got 110 million or 120 million? Makes no difference at all. I mean, if you die at the end of the year, the guy that writes up the story may make a typo and he may say 110 even if he had 120. So you've got nothing at all. It makes absolutely no difference. It makes no difference to your family. It makes no difference to anything. And yet the downside, particularly managing other people's money, is not only losing all your money, but it's disgrace and humiliation and facing friends whose money you've lost and everything. I just can't imagine an equation that makes sense for. And yet 16 guys with very high IQs who are very decent people entered into that game. And I think it's madness, and it's produced by an over-reliance to some extent on things. Those guys would tell me back when I was at Solomon, that a 6 Sigma event wouldn't touch us, or a 7 Sigma event, but they were wrong. I mean, their history does not tell you the probabilities of future financial things happening, and they had a great reliance on mathematics, and they felt that the beta of the stock told you something about the risk of the stock. It doesn't tell you a damn thing about the risk of the stock, in my view. And Sigmas do not tell you about the risk of going broke, in my view, and maybe in their view now too. But I don't like to even use them as an example because they are. I mean, the same thing in a different way could happen to any of us probably, where we really have a blind spot about something that's crucial because we know a whole lot about something else. It's like Henry Kaufman said the other day. He said the people that are going broke in this situation are just of two types: the ones who knew nothing and the ones that knew everything. And it's sad in a way. I urge you, in anything, we never basically borrow money. I mean, we get float through our insurance business and to do things, but I never borrowed money. I never borrowed money when I had $10,000 basically, because what difference did it make? I was having fun as I went along, and it didn't make any difference whether I had $10,000 or $1 million or $10 million. Except if I had a medical emergency or something had come along like that. But I was going to do the same things when I had a lot of money as when I had very little money. If you think about the difference between me and you in terms of how we live, we wear the same clothes basically. SunTrust gives me mine, but you. So we wear the same clothes. We eat. We all have a chance to drink the juice of the gods here. But we all go to McDonald's, or better yet, Dairy Queen, and And we live in a house that's warm in winter and cool in summer, and we watch Nebraska, Texas A&M on a big screen. You see it the same way I see it. We do everything. Our lives aren't that different. You'll get decent medical care if something happens to you, and I'll get decent medical care. The only thing we do is we travel differently. I ride around this little plane, and I love it. And that takes money. But if you leave that aside, we travel differently. But other than travel, I think about it. Think, what can I do that you can't do? Now, I get to work in a job that I love, but I've always worked in a job I loved. I loved it when I loved it just as much when it was a big deal if I made $1,000. And I urge you to work in jobs you love. I mean, I think you're out of your mind if you keep taking jobs that you don't like because you think it'll look good on your resume. I was with a fellow at Harvard the other day who was taking me over to talk, and he was 28, and he was telling me all what he'd done in life, which was terrific. And then I said, "What are you going to do next?" And he said, "Well," he said, "after I get out my MBA," he says, "I think maybe I ought to go to work for a management consulting firm because it'll look good on my resume." And I said, "Wait a second, you've been 28, you've been doing all these things. I mean, you've got a resume that's 10 times as good as anybody I've ever seen it already." I said, "If you take another job you don't like just for," I said, "isn't that a little like saving up sex for your old age? I mean, there comes a time when you ought to just start doing what, So, I think I got the point across to him. But you ought to take a job. When you get out here, take a job you love. Don't take a job that you think is going to look good on your resume. Take a job you love. You may change it later on, but you'll jump out of bed in the morning. I mean, when I got out of Columbia, the first thing I tried to go to work for Graham immediately. I offered to go to work for him for nothing. He said I was overpriced, but I kept pestering him. I went out to Omaha and I sold securities for 3 years, and I kept writing him and giving him ideas and doing all these things. Finally, I went to work for him for a couple of years, and it was a great experience. But I always really worked in a job. I worked in a job that I loved doing. And you should really take a job that if you were independently wealthy, you would take. That's the job to take, because that's the one that you're going to have great fun in. You'll learn something. You'll be excited about it, and you can't miss. You may go do something else later on, but you'll get way more out of it. And I don't care what the starting salary is or anything of the sort. I don't know how I got off on that, but there I am. So I do think that if you think you're going to be a lot happier if you've got 2x instead of x, you're probably making a mistake. I mean, you ought to find something you like that works with that, and you'll get in trouble if you think that making 10x or 20x is the answer to everything in life, because then you will do things like borrow money when you shouldn't, or maybe cut corners on things that your employer wants you to cut corners on. Or it just doesn't make any sense. You won't like it when you look back on it. Yeah.
Would you talk to the students about the companies that you like? I don't mean names. I mean what makes the company something that you like.
I like businesses I can understand. We'll start with that. That narrows it down about 90%. I mean, there's all kinds of things I don't understand, but fortunately, there's enough I do understand. And you got this big wide world out there. Almost every company's publicly owned, so you got all American business practically available to you. Now, to start with, it doesn't make sense to go with things that you think you can understand, but you can understand some things. I can understand this. I mean, you can understand this. Anybody can understand this. I mean, this is a product that basically hasn't been changed much. They've added the cherry, but since 1886 or whatever it was, and it's a simple business. It's not an easy business. I don't want a business that's easy for competitors. So I want a business with a moat around it. I want a very valuable castle in the middle, and then I want the duke who's in charge of that castle to be honest and hardworking and able. And then I want a big moat around the castle, and that moat can be various things. The moat in a business like our auto insurance business at GEICO is low cost. I mean, people have to buy auto insurance, so everybody's going to have one auto insurance policy per car, basically. Or per driver, and I can't sell them 20, but they have to buy one. What are they going to buy it on? They're going to buy it based on service and cost. Most people will assume the service is fairly identical among companies or close enough, so they're going to do it on cost. So I got to be the low-cost producer. That's my moat. To the extent my costs get further lower than the other guy, I've thrown a couple of sharks into the moat. But all the time, if you've got a wonderful castle, there are people out there who are going to try and attack it and take it away from you. And I want a castle that I can understand, but I want a castle with a moat around it. 30 years ago, Eastman Kodak's moat was just as wide as Coca-Cola's moat. I mean, if you were going to take a picture of your 6-month-old baby, and you're going to want to look at that picture 20 years from now, and you're going to look at it 50 years from now, and you're never going to get a chance. I mean, you're not a professional photographer so that you can evaluate what's going to look good 20 or 50 years ago. What is in your mind about that photography company is what counts, because they are promising you that the picture you take today is going to be terrific to look at 20 or 30 or 50 years from now about something that's very important to you, maybe your own child or whatever it may be. Well, Kodak had that in spades 30 years ago. They owned that. They had what I call share of mind. Forget about share of market, share of mind. They had something in everybody's mind around the country, around the world, with a little yellow box and everything, that said Kodak is the best. That's priceless. They've lost some of that. They haven't lost it all, and not due to George Fisher, who runs it. George is doing a great job. But they let that moat narrow. They let Fuji come and start narrowing the moat in various ways. They let them get into the Olympics and take away that special aspect that only Kodak was fit to photograph the Olympics. So Fuji gets there, and immediately in people's minds, Fuji becomes more and a parity with Kodak. You haven't seen that with Coke. Coke's moat is wider now than it was 30 years ago. You can't see the moat day by day, but every time the infrastructure gets built in some country that isn't yet profitable for Coke but will be 20 years from now, the moat is widening a little bit. Things are all the time changing that moat in one direction or another. 10 years from now, you can see the difference. Our managers of the businesses we run, I've got one message to them, which is to widen the moat. And we want to throw crocodiles and sharks and everything else, gators, I guess, into the moat to keep away competitors. And that comes about through service. It comes about through quality of product. It comes about through cost. It comes about sometimes through patents. It comes about through real estate location. So that's the business I'm looking for. Now, what kind of businesses am I going to find like that? Well, I'm going to find them in simple products, because I'm not going to be able to figure out what the moat's going to look like for Oracle or Lotus or Microsoft 10 years from now. I mean, Gates is the best businessman I've ever run into, and they've got a hell of a position, but I really don't know what their business is going to look like 10 years from now. And I certainly don't know what his competitors' businesses are going to look like 10 years from now. Now, I'll name one I don't own. I know what the chewing gum business is going to look like from 10 years from now. I mean, the internet is not going to change how we chew gum. And nothing much else is going to change how we chew gum. And then are there going to be lots of new products? Is it really, our spearmint and juicy fruit and all those going to evaporate? So it isn't going to happen. You give me $1 billion and tell me to go in the chewing gum business and try and make a real dent in Wrigley's, I can't do it. And that's the way I think about business. I say to myself, give me $1 billion and how much can I hurt the guy? Give me $10 billion. Give me $10 billion and how much can I hurt Coca-Cola around the world? I can't do it. Well, those are good businesses. Now give me some money and tell me to hurt somebody in some other fields, and I can figure out how to do it. So I want a simple business, easy to understand, great economics now, honest and able management, and then I can see about, in a general way, where they're going to be 10 years from now. And if I can't see where they're going to be 10 years from now, I don't want to buy it. Basically, I don't want to buy any stock where if they close the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow for 5 years, I won't be happy owning it. I buy a farm, and I don't get a quote on it for 5 years, and I'm happy if the farm does okay. I buy an apartment house, don't get a quote on it for 5 years, I'm happy if the apartment house produces the returns that I expect. But people buy a stock, and they look at the price the next morning, and they decide whether they're doing well or not doing well. It's crazy, because they're buying a piece of a business. That's what Graham, the most fundamental part of what he taught me. You're not buying a stock, you're buying a part ownership in a business. You will do well if the business does well, and if you didn't pay a totally silly price. And that's what it's all about. And you ought to buy businesses you understand. Just like if you're buying farms, you ought to buy farms you understand. It's not complicated. Incidentally, in calling this Graham Buffett, I mean, it's just pure Graham. I was very fortunate because I picked up a book when I was 19. I got interested in stocks when I was about 6 or 7, and I bought my first stock when I was 11, but I was playing around with all this stuff. I had charts and volume, and I'm making all kinds of technical calculations and everything. And then I picked up a little book, and it just said that you're not buying some little ticker symbol that bounces around every day. You're buying a part of a business. And as soon as I started thinking about it that way, everything else followed. Very simple. So we buy businesses we think we can understand. There's no one here that can't understand the Coca-Cola company. I would say there's no one here that can understand some new internet company. And I said at the annual meeting this year that if I were teaching a class in business school, on the final exam, I would pass out the information on an internet company and ask each student to value it. And anybody that gave me an answer, I'd flunk. I don't know how to do it. But people do it every day. I mean, it's more exciting. I mean, if you look at it like going to the races or something, that's a different thing. But if you're investing, I mean, investing is putting out money to be sure of getting more money back later, at an appropriate rate. And to do that, you have to understand what you're doing it in. I mean, you have to understand the business. And you can understand some businesses, but not all businesses.
Warren, so you covered half of it, which is trying to understand a business and buying a business, but you also alluded to getting a return on the amount of capital you invest in the business as an investor. And that comes back to what are you paying for the business. How do you determine what you think is a fair price to pay for the business?
It's a tough thing to decide, but I don't want to buy into any business I'm not terribly sure of. So if I'm terribly sure of it, it probably isn't going to offer incredible returns. I mean, why should something that is essentially a cinch to do well offer you 40% a year or something like that? So we don't have huge returns in mind, but we do have in mind never losing anything. And I mean, we bought See's Candy in 1972. See's Candy was then selling 16 million pounds of candy at $1.95 a pound, and it was making 2 bits a pound or $4 million pre-tax. We paid $25 million for it. Took no capital to speak of. When we looked at that business, basically my partner Charlie and I really decided whether there was a little untapped pricing power there. In other words, whether that $1.95 box of candy could just as easily sell for $2 or $2.25. If it could sell for $2.25, another 30 cents a pound was $4.8 million on 16 million pounds, which on a 25 million purchase price was fine. We didn't do any, we've never hired a consultant in our lives. Our idea of consulting is go out and buy a box of candy, and eat it. But what we did know was that they had share of mind in California. I mean, there was something special. Every person in California had something in their mind about See's Candy, and overwhelmingly was favorable. They had taken a box, Valentine's Day, and given it to some girl, and she'd kissed him. If she'd slapped him, we'd have no business. But as long as she kisses him, that's what we want in their mind. See's Candy getting kissed. And if we can get that in the minds of people, we can raise prices. And I bought that in I bought it in 1972. We've raised every year. I raise the price on December 26th. I raise it the day after Christmas, so that everybody, because we sell a lot at Christmas. In fact, we'll make $60 million this year. We'll sell 30 million pounds, make $2 a pound. Same business, same formulas, same everything. 60 million bucks still doesn't take any capital, and we'll make more money 10 years from now. But of that 60 million, we make about 55 million in the 3 weeks before Christmas. And our company song is "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." I mean, it is. It is a good business. But the important thing about that business is, think about it a little. Most people don't buy boxed chocolates to consume themselves. They buy them as gifts. Somebody's birthday. More likely, it's a holiday. It's Valentine's Day, single biggest day of the year. Christmas is the biggest season by far. But women buy for Christmas, and they plan ahead and buy over a 2 or 3 week period. Men buy on Valentine's Day. They're driving home. We run ads on the radio. Guilt, 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 guilt. The guys are veering off the freeway right and left. And they won't dare go home without a box of candy when we get through with them on our radio ads. So that Valentine's Day is the biggest day. But can you imagine going home on Valentine's Day, and our See's Candy is now $11 a pound, thanks to my brilliance. And and let's say there's candy available at $6 a pound. But do you really want to walk in on Valentine's Day and hand, your wife's got all these favorable images of the See's Candy over the years, and she sees you, and that's the way she thinks of you during the rest of the year when you really behave kind of badly. And you walk in and say, "Honey, this year I took the low bid," and then hand her a box of candy. It just isn't going to work. So, in a sense, there's untapped price. It's not price dependent, basically. Think of Disney. Disney is selling, we'll say, home videos for, $16.95, $18.95, or whatever. All over the world, people, and we'll say particularly mothers in this case, have something in their mind about Disney. Every person in this room, when you say Disney, has something in their mind about it. If I say Universal Pictures, you don't have anything in your mind. If I say 20th Century Fox, you don't have anything special in your mind. If I say Disney, you've got something in your mind. And that's true around the world. Now picture yourself with a couple of young kids, who you want to put away for a couple hours every day so you get a little peace of mind. And if you get them one video, they'll watch it 20 times. So you go to the video store or wherever you buy the video. Are you going to sit there and premiere, 10 different videos and watch them each for an hour and a half to decide which one your kid should watch? No. Let's say there's one there for $16.95 and the Disney's there for $17.95. You know if you take the Disney video, you're going to be okay. So you buy it. And you don't have to make a quality decision on something that you don't want to spend the time to do. And so you can get a little bit more money if you're Disney, and you'll sell a lot more videos. Makes it a wonderful business. Makes it very tough for the other guy. How would you try to create a brand? DreamWorks is trying, but how would you try to create a brand that competes with Disney around the world and to replace the concept that people have in their minds about Disney with something that says Universal Pictures? You know, so that the mother's going to walk in and pick out a Universal Pictures video in preference to a Disney. It's not going to happen. You know, Coca-Cola is associated with people being happy around the world. We're every place they're happy. We're at Disney World or Disneyland. We're at the World Cup. We'll be at the Olympics. We're every place where people are happy. Happiness and Coke go together. Now, you give me, I don't care how much money, and tell me that I'm going to do that with RC Cola around the world and have 5 billion people that have a favorable image in their mind about RC Cola. It can't get done. You know, and you can fool around with you can do anything you want to do. You know, have price discounts on weekends and everything, but you're not going to touch it. And that's what you want to have in a business. That's the moat. And you want that moat to widen. And if you're See's Candy, you want to do everything in the world to make sure that the experience, basically, of giving that gift leads to a favorable reaction. That means what's in the box. It means the person that sells it to you, because all our business is done when we're terribly busy. I mean, people come in those weeks before Christmas or on Valentine's Day, and there are long lines. So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, some woman is selling the last person the last box of candy, and that person's been waiting in line for maybe 20 or 30 customers. And if the salesperson smiles at that last customer, our moat is widened. And if she snarls at him, our moat is narrowed. We can't see it. It's going on every day, but that's the key to it. I mean, it's a total part of the product delivery is having everything associated with it, say, See's Candy, and something pleasant happening. And that's what business is all about. Yep.
When purchasing a company, how much qualitative analysis do you do versus quantitative analysis? And have you ever bought a company where the numbers told you not to?
Those are the best buys. The question is whether have I ever bought a company where the numbers told me not to, and how much is qualitative and how much is quantitative. The best buys have been when the numbers almost tell you not to. I mean, because then you feel so strongly about the product, and not just the fact that you're getting a used cigar butt cheap, that it's compelling. I mean, I owned a windmill company at one time, so you know, windmills are cigar butts, believe me. And I bought it very cheap. I bought it at a third of working capital, and we made money out of it. But there's no repetitive money to be earned. I mean, there's a one-time profit in something like that, and it's just not. It's not the thing to be doing. I went through that phase. I mean, I bought streetcar companies and all kinds of things. But in terms of the qualitative, I probably understand the qualitative the moment I get the phone call. I mean, almost every business we've bought has taken 5 or 10 minutes, I mean, in terms of analysis. And we bought 2 businesses this year. General Re is, you know, $18 billion or some deal. I've never been to their home office. Yeah. I hope it's there. Yeah, there could be just a few guys, and they say, well, what numbers shall we send Buffett this month? You know, I can see him coming in once a month and saying, well, we'll just tell him we've got $20 billion in the bank this month instead of $18 billion or something. But I've never been there. And before, I bought Executive Jet, which is fractional ownership of jets. And before I bought it, I'd never been there. I bought my family a quarter interest in the program 3 years earlier, and I'd seen the service and seen it develop well. And I got the numbers, but if you don't know enough to know about the business instantly, you won't know enough in a month or 2 months. I mean, you have to have sort of the background of understanding and knowing what you do understand and don't understand. And that is the key. It's defining what I call your circle of competence. And everybody's got a different circle of competence. The important thing is not how big the circle is. The important thing is staying inside the circle. And if that circle has only got 30 companies in it out of thousands on the big board, as long as you know which 30 they are, you're okay. And you should know those businesses well enough so that you don't need to do lots of work. Now, I did a lot of work in the earlier years just in getting familiar with businesses. And the way I would do that is I would go out and use what Phil Fisher called the scuttlebutt approach. I'd go out, I'd talk to customers, I'd talk to maybe ex-employees in some cases, I'd talk to suppliers, everybody. Every time I'd see somebody in an industry, let's say I was interested in the coal industry, I'd go around and see every coal company, and I'd ask every CEO, if you could only buy stock in one coal company that wasn't your own, which one would it be and why? And you piece those things together, and you learn a lot about the business after a while. And the funny thing is you get very similar answers as long as you ask about competitors. That, I'd say if you got a silver bullet, and you put it through the head of one competitor, which competitor and why, you'll find out who the best guy in the industry is in that case, or the one that's coming up. And there's a lot of things you can learn about a business. I've done that in the past on the businesses that I feel I could understand, so I don't have to do much of that anymore. It's a nice thing about investing is you don't have to learn anything very new. I mean, you can do it if you want to, but if you learned about Wrigley's chewing gum 40 years ago, you still understand Wrigley's chewing gum. There's not a lot of great insights to get or anything of the sort as you go along. So you do get a database in your head. I had a guy, Frank Rooney, who ran Melville for many years. His father-in-law died, owned a company called H.H. Brown, a shoe company. And he put it up with Goldman Sachs, but he was playing golf with a friend of mine here in Florida and mentioned to this friend. The guy said, "Why don't you call Warren?" He called me at the end of the golf match, and in 5 minutes I basically had a deal. But I knew Frank, and I knew the kind of business, and I sort of knew the basic economics of a shoe business, and so I could buy it. And quantitatively, I got to decide what the price is. That's either yes or no. I mean, I don't fool around a lot with negotiations. So if they name a price that makes sense to me, I buy it. And if they don't, I was happy the day before, so I'll be happy the day after without owning it. Yeah.
Coca-Cola just announced a drop in expectations in terms of future earnings and report earnings. And in light of the fact that Coke has a lot of their profits coming in from outside the United States, how do you think the Asian crisis, so to speak, is going to affect Coke, and for that matter, the business company in general?
The question is about the Asian crisis and how it affects a company like Coke that recently announced that the earnings, actually they just announced their third quarter earnings, but a few weeks ago they tipped people off that they were going to be lower in the fourth quarter and so on. Well, basically I love it, but because the market for Coca-Cola products is going to grow far faster over the next 20 years internationally than it will in the United States. It'll grow in the United States on a per capita basis, but it's going to grow faster elsewhere. So the fact that it's going to be a tough period for, who knows, 3 months or 3 years, but it won't be tough for 20 years. I mean, people are still going to, they're going to work productively around the world, and they're going to find that this is a bargain product in terms of the portion of their working day that they have to give up in order to have one of these, or better yet, 5 of them a day, like I do. This is a product. In 1936, when I first bought 6 of those for a quarter and sold them for a nickel each, and it was in a 6.5-ounce bottle, and you paid a 2-cent deposit on the bottle, that was a 6.5-ounce bottle for a nickel at that time. It's now a 12-ounce can, which if you buy it on weekends, or if you buy it in bigger quantities, so much money doesn't go to the packaging, I mean, you essentially can buy the 12 ounces for not much more than 20 cents. So you're paying not much more than twice the per ounce price of 1936. It is a product that's gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper in relative to people's earning power over the years, and which people love. In 200 countries, you have the per capita use going up every year for a product that's over 100 years old, and that dominates the market. I mean, it's unbelievable. One thing that people don't understand is one of the things that makes this product, this is worth tens and tens of billions of dollars, is one simple fact about really all colas, but we'll call it Coca-Cola for the moment. It happens to be a name I like. Cola has no taste memory. You can drink one of these at 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock. The one at 5 o'clock will taste just as good to you as the one you drank early in the morning. You can't do that with cream soda, root beer, orange, grape, you name it. All of those things accumulate on you. Most foods and beverages accumulate on you. You get sick of them after a while. And if you eat, I mean, we get these people who go to work for us that seize candy, and we tell them they eat all the candy they want. And the first day they go crazy. But after a week, they're eating about the same amount they'd eat if they were buying it, because chocolate accumulates on, everything accumulates on. There is no taste memory to cola. And that means that you get people around the world that are heavy users that'll drink 5 a day, or Diet Coke, maybe 7 or 8 a day or something of the sort. They'll never do that with other products. So you get this incredible per capita consumption. The average person in this part of the world, well, maybe a little north of here, drinks about 64 ounces of liquid a day. And you can have all 64 ounces of that be Coke, and you will not get fed up with Coke if you like it to start with, in the least. But if you do that with almost anything else, if you eat just one product all day, you'll get a little sick of it after a while, and it's a huge factor. So that today, over 1 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products will be sold in the world, and that will grow year by year. It'll grow in every country virtually, and it'll grow on a per capita basis, and 20 years from now it'll grow in a lot faster internationally than in the U.S. So I really like that market better, because there is more growth there over time. But it will hurt them it is hurting them in the short term right now. But that doesn't mean anything. I mean, Coca-Cola went public in, I think it was 1919. Stock sold for $40 a share. It went back before that. It was the Candler family, and they went back. They bought it for $2,000, the whole business. Asa Candler back in the late 1880s in a couple of purchases. So now he goes public in 1919. $40 a share. 1 year later, it's selling for $19, gone down 50% in 1 year. Now you might think that's some kind of disaster, and you might think that sugar prices increased and the bottlers were rebellious and a whole bunch of things. You could always find a few reasons why that wasn't the ideal moment to buy it. Years later, you'd have seen the Great Depression, and you'd have seen World War II, and you'd seen sugar rationing, and you'd seen thermonuclear weapons, and the whole thing. There's always a reason. But in the end, if you bought one share for $40 and reinvested the dividends, it'd be worth about $5 million now. And that factor so overrides anything else. I mean, if you're right about the business, you'll make a lot of money. And the timing part of it is a very tricky thing. So I don't worry about any given event if I've got a wonderful business. What it does to next year or something of the sort. Their price controls have been in this country at various times, and that's fouled up even the best of businesses. I mean, I wouldn't be able to raise the price on December 26th of the Seas Candy if we had price controls, and we've had them in this country. But that doesn't make it a lousy business if that happens to happen, because you're not going to have price controls forever. We had them in the early 70s. So the wonderful business, you can figure out what will happen. You can't figure out when it will happen. You don't want to focus too much on when. You want to focus on what. If you're right about what, you don't have to worry about when very much. Is there an area I'm missing back there any place? I just want to make sure I'm not focusing all of them on one place. Let me get this gentleman over here.
Most humans make mistakes, but the most successful of those will learn lessons from those mistakes and use them to benefit themselves later. What investment mistakes have you made or that you feel that you made, and how can you use those lessons?
The question is about my business mistakes. How much time do you have? Well, the interesting thing about the mistakes is that in investments, at least for me and for my partner, Charlie Munger, the biggest mistakes have not been mistakes of commission, they've been mistakes of omission. They're where we knew enough about the business to do something, and for one reason or another, we sat there sucking our thumbs instead of doing something. And so we've passed up things where we could have made billions and billions of dollars from things we understood. Forget about things we don't understand. In fact, I could make billions out of Microsoft. Doesn't mean anything because I never understand Microsoft. But if I can make billions out of healthcare stocks, then I should make it, and I didn't. When the Clinton healthcare program was proposed and they all went in the tank, we should have made a ton of money out of that because I could understand it. And I didn't make it. I should have made a ton of money out of Fannie Mae back in the mid '80s because I understood it and I didn't do it. Those are billion-dollar mistakes or multi-billion-dollar mistakes that generally accepted accounting principles don't pick up. The mistakes you see, we made I made a mistake buying U.S. Air Preferred some years ago. I mean, I had a lot of money around. I make mistakes when I get cash. Charlie tells me to go to a bar instead. Don't hang around the office. But I hang around the office and I got money in my pocket. I do something dumb. And it happens every time. So I bought this thing. Nobody made me buy it. I now have a 800 number I call every time I think about buying stock in an airline, and they talk me down. They say, I say, I'm Warren, I'm an airaholic, and then the guy says, keep talking, don't hang up, and don't do anything rash. And finally I get over it. But I bought it, and it looked like we were going to lose all our money in that, and we came very close to losing all our money, and you can say we deserved to lose all our money. And we bought it because it was an attractive security, but it was not in an attractive business. I did the same thing with Solomon. I bought an attractive security in a business that I wouldn't have bought the equity in. So you can say that that's one form of mistake, buying something because you like the terms when you don't like the business that well. And I've done that in the past and probably do it again. The bigger mistakes, though, are the ones of omission. I did back when I had the $10,000. I put $2,000 of it into a Sinclair service station, which I lost. So my opportunity cost on that's about $6 billion right now. Fairly big mistake. Yeah, it makes me feel good when Berkshire goes down then, because the cost of my Sinclair station goes down too. My 20% opportunity cost. But I will say this: you talk about learning from mistakes. I really believe it's better to learn from other people's mistakes as much as possible. But we don't spend any time looking back at Berkshire. I've got a partner, Charlie Munger. We've been pals for 40 years. We've never had an argument. We disagree on things a lot, but we don't have arguments about it, and we never look back. We just figure there's so much to look forward to that there's just no sense thinking about what we might have. It just doesn't make any difference. I mean, you can only live life forward, and you can learn something perhaps from the mistakes, but the big thing to do is stick with the businesses you understand. And so if there's a generic mistake of getting outside of your circle of competence and buying something because somebody tips you on it or something of the sort in an area you don't know anything about, I mean, that you should learn something from that, which is that you stay with what you can figure out yourself. I mean, you really want your decision making to be by looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, I'm buying 100 shares of General Motors at 55 because. And I mean, it's your responsibility if you're buying it, and there's got to be a reason. And if you can't state the reason, you shouldn't buy it. If it's because somebody told you about it at a cocktail party, not good enough. I mean, it's got to be something. It can't be because the volume, the chart looks good on it or anything like that. It's got to be a reason you'd buy the business, and we stick to pretty carefully. That's one of the things Ben Graham taught me. Yeah.
Where are we going? What's going to happen with interest rates?
The question about what's going to happen to interest rates or where we go in the world, I don't think about the macro stuff. I just important. What you really want to do in investments is figure out what's important and knowable. If it's unimportant or unknowable, you forget about it. What you talk about is important, but in my view, it's not knowable. Understanding Coca-Cola is knowable, or Wrigley, or Eastman Kodak, or anything. I mean, you can understand those businesses. That's knowable. And whether it turns out to be important depends on where your valuation leads you and the current price and all of that. But we have never either bought a business or not bought a business because of any macro feeling of any kind. We don't read things about predictions about interest rates or business or anything like that because it doesn't make any difference. I mean, let's say in 1972 when we bought See's Candy, I think maybe Nixon put on the price controls a little bit later. Let's say we'd seen that. But so what? We'd have missed a chance to buy something for $25 million that's earning $60 million pre-tax now. I mean, we don't want to pass up the chance to do something intelligent because of some prediction about something that we're no good on it anyway. So we just don't read or listen to or do anything in relation to macro factors at all. Zero. And the typical investment counseling organization goes out and they bring out their economists, they trot him out, and he gives you this big macro picture, and then they start working from there on down. In our view, that's nonsense. And if Alan Greenspan was on one side of me and Bob Rubin on the other side, they were both whispering in my ear exactly what they're going to do the next 12 months. It wouldn't make any difference to me in what I pay for executive jet or general reinsurance or anything else I do. Yeah.
What's the benefit of being an out-of-towner from Wall Street as an investor?
Well, what's the benefit of being an out-of-towner as opposed to being in Wall Street? I worked in Wall Street for a couple of years, and I've got my best friends actually, and I'm on both coasts, and I like seeing them, and I get ideas when I go there. But the best way to think about investments is to be in a room with no one else and just think. And if that doesn't work, nothing else is going to work. And the disadvantage of being in any kind of a market-type environment in Wall Street would be the extreme is that you get overstimulated. You think you have to do something every day. I mean, the Canberra family paid $2,000 for this company, and you don't have to do much else if you pick one of those. And the trick then is not to do anything else, even not to sell it in 1919, which the family did later on. So what you're looking for is some way to get one good idea a year, and then ride it to its full potential. And that's very hard to do in an environment where people are shouting prices back and forth every 5 minutes and shoving reports under your nose and all that. Because Wall Street makes its money on activity. You make your money on inactivity. You know, I mean, if everybody in this room trades their portfolio around every day with every other person, you know, you're all going to end up broke, and the intermediary is going to end up with all the money. On the other hand, if you all own stock in a group of average businesses and just sit here for the next 50 years, you'll end up with a fair amount of money, and your broker will be broke. So his activity is he's like a doctor who gets paid on how often he gets you to change pills. I mean, basically. I mean, if he gives you one pill and it cures you the rest of your life, you know, he's got one sale, one transaction, and that's it. But if he can convince you that changing pills every day is the way to great health, it'll be great for him and the prescriptionists, and you'll be out a lot of money, and you won't be any healthier. You'll be a lot worse off financially. So you want to stay away from any environment that stimulates activity, and Wall Street would have the effect of doing that. I used when I went out to Omaha, I'd go back about once every 6 months, and I'd go back with a whole list of things I wanted to check out one way or another, companies I wanted to see, and I would get my money's worth out of those trips. But then I'd go back to Omaha and think about it. Yeah.
How should an investor evaluate owning shares of Berkshire Hathaway or Microsoft when they don't pay dividends to the investor?
Yeah, well, the question with Berkshire Hathaway, the question was about evaluating Berkshire when it doesn't pay any dividends, and it won't pay any dividends either. It's a promise I can keep. All you get with Berkshire, you stick it in your safe deposit box, and then every year you go down and fondle it. You know, you take it out and you fondle it, then you put it back. And I mean, there's enormous psychic reward in that. You don't underestimate it. But the real question is whether we can keep retaining dollar bills and turning them into more than a dollar at a decent rate. And that's what we try to do. And Charlie Munger and I have our money in it to do that. That's all we'll get paid for doing. We won't take any options. We won't take any salaries to speak of or anything. We'll ride around in the plane. But that's what we're trying to do. It gets harder all the time. The more money we manage, the harder it is to do that. And we would do way better percentage-wise with Berkshire if it was 1/100th the present size. But it is run for its owners, but it isn't run to give them dividends, because so far every dollar that we've earned and could have paid out, we've turned into more than a dollar. It's worth more than a dollar to keep it, and therefore it'd be silly to pay it out. Even if everybody was tax-free that owned it, it would have been a mistake to pay dividends at Berkshire, because so far the dollar bills retained have turned into more than a dollar. But there's no guarantee that that happens in the future, and at some point the game runs out on that. But it is the goal of, I mean, that is what the business is about. We're not, nothing else about the business do we judge ourselves by. We don't judge it by the size of its home office building or, you know, anything of the number of people working around it. We've got 12 people at headquarters. We've got 45,000 employees at Berkshire and 12 people at headquarters, 3,500 square feet. And we won't change it. So we will judge ourselves by the performance of the company. And that's the only way we'll get paid. But believe me, it's a lot harder than it used to be. But anything way in the back, because I want to make sure I'm not missing people back there that haven't called. Okay, then we'll go to the, well, how about way over there on the aisle? Yeah. I missed this. What made me decide to invest what?
One of your investments has reached its full potential. As you said earlier that you...
I missed the last part of it. Oh, reached its full potential. Well, ideally you buy in businesses where you feel that will never happen in terms of... I mean, I don't buy Coke with the idea that it's going to be out of gas in 10 years, you know, or 15 years. I mean, there could be something happen, but I would think that the chances of that are almost nil. So what we really want to do is buy businesses that we would be happy to own forever. It's the same way I feel about people who buy Berkshire. I want people to buy Berkshire that plan to hold it forever. They may not for one reason or another, but I want them at the time they buy it to think they are buying a business that they're going to own forever. And I don't say that's the only way to buy things. It's just that that's the group I want to have join me, because I don't want to have a changing group all the time. I measure Berkshire by how little activity there is in it. If I had a church and I was the preacher and half the congregation left every Sunday, I wouldn't say, oh, this is marvelous because I have all this liquidity among my members, you know. You know, there's terrific turnover, you know. I would rather get a church where all the seats are filled, you know, every Sunday by the same people. Well, that's the way we look at the businesses we buy. We want to buy something that we're really happy to own virtually forever, and we can't find a lot of those. And back when I started, I had way more ideas than money, so I was just constantly having to sell what I thought was the least attractive stock in order to buy something that I just discovered that looked even cheaper. But that's not our problem really now. And so we hope we're buying businesses that we're just as happy with 5 years from now as now. And if we ever found some huge acquisition, you know, then we'd have to sell something maybe to make that acquisition. But that would be a very pleasant problem to have. We never buy something with a price target in mind. I mean, we never buy something at 30 saying if it goes to 40 we'll sell it, or 50 or 60 or 100. We just don't do it that way any more than when we buy a private business like See's Candy for $25 million. We don't say to ourselves, if we ever get an offer of $50 million for this business, we'd sell it. That's just not the way to look at a business. The way to look at a business is this going to keep producing more and more and more money over time? And if the answer to that is yes, you don't need to ask any more questions. Yeah, way back there.
Those same principles in mind, what was the motivation for taking a piece of Solomon and similarly the long-term capital? And how did you come up with the valuation?
Well, Solomon, like I said, I went into that because it was a 9% security in 1987, September 1987. The Dow was up 35% that year. We'd sold a lot of stuff, and I had a lot of money around. It looked to me like we were never going to get a chance to do anything. So I took an attractive security form in a business I would never buy the common stock of. And I went in because of that, and I think that's generally a mistake. It worked out okay finally on that, but it's not what I should have been doing. I either should have waited, in which case I could have bought more Coca-Cola a year later or thereabouts, or I should have even bought Coke at the prices it was selling at then, even though it was selling at a pretty good price at the time. So that was a mistake. On long-term capital, we have learned other businesses that are associated with securities over the years. And, I mean, one of them is arbitrage. I've done arbitrage for 45 years, and Graham did it for probably 30 years before that. And that's a business, unfortunately, I have to be near a phone for, and I have to really run out of the office myself because it requires being more sort of market attuned. And I don't want to do that anymore. So unless a really big arbitrage situation came along that I understood, I won't be doing much of that. But I've probably been in 300 arbitrage situations at least in my life, maybe more. And it was a good business, perfectly good business. Long-term capital has a bunch of positions. They got tons of positions, but the top 10 are probably 90% of the money that's at risk. And I know something about those 10 positions. I don't know everything about them by a long shot. But I know enough where I would feel okay at a big discount going in, and we would have the staying power to hold it out. We might lose money on something like that, but the odds are with us. That's a game that I understand. There's a few other positions we have that aren't that big because they can't get that big, but they could involve yield curve relationships or on the run, off the run governments or things like that are just things you learn over time if you're around securities markets. They're not the base of our business. Probably on average, they've accounted for a half a percentage point of our return a year, or 3/4 of a percentage point a year of our return. They're little pluses that you get for actually having just been around a long time and learning a little bit about it. The first arbitrage, not the first arbitrage I did, but one of the first arbitrages I did, involved a company where they were offering cocoa beans in exchange for their stock. That was in 1955. And I bought the stock, turned in the stock, got warehouse certificates for cocoa beans, and they happened to be a different type. They were trading in the New York Cocoa Exchange, but there was a basis differential in my favor, and I sold them. I mean, that's just something that I was around at the time, so I learned about. Hasn't been a cocoa bean deal since. 40-odd years. I've been waiting for another cocoa bean deal. I haven't seen it, but it's there in my memory if it ever comes along. And that long-term capital is that on a big scale. Yep. The question is about diversification, and I've got a dual answer to that. If you are not a professional investor, if your goal is not to manage money in such a way as to get a significantly better return than the world, then I believe in extreme diversification. I mean, so I believe 98 or 99%, maybe more than 99% of people who invest should extensively diversify and not trade. So that leads them to an index fund type of decision with very low costs. Because all they're going to do is own a part of America. And they made a decision that owning a part of America is worthwhile. I don't quarrel with that at all. That is the way they should approach it, unless they want to bring an intensity to the game to make a decision and start evaluating businesses. But once you're in the business of evaluating businesses, and you decide that you're going to bring the effort and intensity and time involved to get that job done, then I think that diversification is a terrible mistake to any degree. And I got asked that question when I was at SunTrust the other day. And if you really know businesses, you probably shouldn't own more than 6 of them. I mean, if you can identify 6 wonderful businesses, that is all the diversification you need. And you're going to make a lot of money. And I will guarantee you that going into a 7th one is going to, rather than putting more money in your first one, it's got to be a terrible mistake. Very few people have gotten rich on their 7th best idea, but a lot of people have gotten rich on their best idea. So I would say that for anybody working with normal capital who really knows the businesses they've gone into, a 6 is plenty, and I'd probably have half of it in what I liked best. I don't diversify personally. I mean, and all the people I know that have done well, with the exception of, well, we mentioned Walter Schloss earlier. Walter diversifies a lot. He owns a little of everything. I call him Noah. He's got 2 of everything. Yeah.
How do you differentiate the Coca-Colas of the world from the Procter & Gamble's of the world?
Well, Procter & Gamble's a very, very good business. Strong distribution capabilities, lots of brand names and everything. But if you ask me, if I'm going to go away for 20 years, to put all my family's net worth in one business, would I rather have Procter & Gamble or Coke? Actually, Procter & Gamble's a little more, it'd be more diversified among product line, but I would feel sure of Coke than Procter & Gamble. I wouldn't be unhappy if somebody told me I had to own Procter & Gamble during that 20-year period. I mean, that would be in my top 5% because they are not going to get killed. But I would feel better about the unit growth and the pricing power of a Coke over 20 or 30 years than I would about a Procter & Gamble. Right now, the pricing power might be tough, but you think of a billion servings a day, an extra penny, $10 million a day. We own 8% of it. That's $800,000 a day for Berkshire Hathaway. You get another penny out of the stuff. Doesn't seem impossible, does it? I mean, it's worth another penny. It doesn't. Right now, it'd be a mistake to try and get it in most markets, but over time, Coke will make more per serving than it does now. 20 years from now, I'll guarantee it'll make more per serving. They'll be selling a whole lot more servings. I don't know how many, I don't know how much more, but I know that. P&G's main products, I don't think they have the kind of dominance, and they don't have the kind of unit growth, but they're good businesses. I would not be unhappy if you told me that I had to put my family's net worth in P&G, and that was the only stock I could own. I would, I might prefer some other names, but there aren't 100 other names I would prefer. Yeah.
On that same model, what about McDonald's? Should we go away 20 years from that?
McDonald's, the question's about McDonald's and going away for 20 years. McDonald's has got a lot of things going for it, and particularly abroad again. I mean, their position abroad in many countries is stronger relatively than here. It's a tougher business over time. People do not want to eat, exception to the kids when they're giving away Beanie Babies or something, people do not want to eat at McDonald's every day. I mean, if people are drinking Coke today, if they drink 5 of them today, they'll probably drink 5 tomorrow. The fast food business is tougher than that. But if you had to pick one hand to have in the fast food business, which is going to be a huge business worldwide, you'd pick McDonald's. I mean, it has the strongest position. It doesn't win taste tests, with adults. It does very well with children, and it does fine with adults. But it is not like it's a clear winner. And it's gotten into the game in recent years of being more price promotional, and you remember the experiment a year ago or so, and so it's gotten more dependent on that rather than just selling the product by itself. I like a product by itself sells. I feel better about Gillette if people buy the Mach 3 because they like the Mach 3 than if they get a Beanie Baby with it. So I just think it's fundamentally a stronger product if that's the case, and it probably is. We own a lot of Gillette, and you can sleep pretty well at night if you think of a couple billion men with their hair growing on their faces. You go to, it's growing all night while you sleep, and women have 2 legs. It's even better. So it beats counting sheep. And those are the kind of business. But if you think, what promotion am I going to put out there against Burger King next month? And what if they sign up Disney and I don't get Disney? And I mean, that is. I like the products that stand alone, absent promotional or price appeals. Although you can build a very good business based on that, and McDonald's is a terrific business. It's not as good a business as Coke, but there really are hardly any. It's a very good business, and if you bet on one company in that field, aside from Dairy Queen, of course, you want to bet on McDonald's. We bought Dairy Queen here a while back. That's why I'm plugging it shamelessly here. Yeah, way back there. What do I think of what? The electric utility industry. Well, I've thought about that a lot because you can put big money in it, and I've even thought of buying entire businesses. There's a fellow in Omaha actually that's done a little of that through Cal Energy, but I don't quite understand the game in terms of how it's going to develop with deregulation. I mean, I can see how it destroys a lot of value for the high-cost producer, once they're not protected by a monopoly territory, and I don't for sure see who benefits and how much. I mean, obviously the guy with very low-cost power, some guy that's got hydropower, at 2 cents a kilowatt or something like that, has got a huge advantage. But how much of that he's going to get to keep and everything, or how extensively he can send that outside his natural territory, I haven't been able to figure that out so that I really think I know what the industry is going to look like in 10 years. But it is something I think about, and if I ever develop any insights, that call for action, I'll develop. I will act on them. Because I think I can understand the attractiveness of the product, and it's all of that, all of the aspects of certainty, of user need, and the fact that it's a bargain and all of that. I understand. I just don't understand who's going to make the money in it 10 years from now, and that keeps me away. Yeah.
Do you think that the market has favored the large cap blue chip stocks over the small cap stocks over the next couple of years?
The question is large caps versus small caps, and why large caps overperform. I don't know the answer to that. We don't think we don't care whether companies large cap, giant cap, middle cap, small cap, micro cap. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, the only question to us is, can we understand the business? Do we like the people running it? And does it sell for a price that is attractive? From my personal standpoint, running Berkshire now, because we've got pro forma for Gen Re, I don't know what we have, maybe $75 or $80 billion to invest, and I only want to invest in about 5 things. So I'm really limited to very big companies. But if I were investing $100,000, I wouldn't care whether something was large cap or small cap or anything. I would just look for businesses I understood. Now, I think that on balance, large cap companies as businesses have done extraordinarily well the last 10 years, and way better than people anticipated they would do. I mean, you really have American business earning close to 20% on equity, and that's something nobody dreamed of, and that's being produced by very large companies in aggregate. So you've had this huge revaluation upward because of lower interest rates, and then much higher returns on capital. And if American business is really a bond, disguised bond that earns 20%, has a 20% coupon, it's much better than if it's a bond with a 13% coupon. And that's happened with big companies in recent years. Whether it's permanent or not is another question. I'm skeptical of that, but I don't. I wouldn't even think about, except for questions of how much money we run. I wouldn't even think about the size of the business. A good small See's Candy was a $25 million business when we bought it. I mean, if I could find one just like it now, even as big as we are, I'd love to buy it. It's the certainty of it that counts. Yeah, way over there.
You mentioned earlier that in buying stock, almost every company is public. And one thing until the last 5 years, real estate has been primarily private. We're now seeing a great securitization of real estate. And what is your insights into the industry?
Yeah, you're talking about real estate. There's been securitization, enormous securitization of the debt, too, of real estate. And that is one of the items right now that is really clogging up the capital markets. I mean, the mortgage-backed securities they're just not moving in commercial mortgage-backed, not residential mortgage-backed, and so that's. But I think you're directing your question at equities probably, and the equities. If you leave out the corporate form, has been a lousy way to own equities. I mean, you've interjected a corporate income tax into something that people individually have been able to own with a single tax, and by having the normal corporate form, you get a double taxation in there you really don't need with real estate, and it takes away too much of the return. REITs have, in effect, created a conduit so that you don't get the double taxation, but they also generally have fairly high operating expenses. And if you get real estate, let's just say you can buy fairly simple types of real estate on an 8% yield or thereabouts, and you take away maybe close to 1 or 1, maybe even 1.5% by the time you count stock options and everything. It's not a terribly attractive way to own it. Maybe the only way a guy with $1,000 or $5,000 can own it. But if you have $1 million or $10 million, you're better off owning the real estate properties yourself and sticking some intermediary in between that will get a sizable piece of the return for himself. So we have found very little in that field. You'll see an announcement in the next couple of weeks that may belie what I'm telling you here on one thing. So I don't want you to think I was double-crossing you up here. But generally speaking, we've seen very, very little in that field that gets us excited. People sometimes get very, very confused about, they'll look at some huge land company. I'll take one that won't evoke any emotional reactions on the part of anybody, like Texas Pacific Land Trust, which has been around over 100 years and got a couple million acres in Texas. And they'll take they'll sell 1% of their land every year, and they'll take that as applying to everything and come up with some huge value compared to the market value. But that's nonsense if you really own the property. I mean, you can't move. You can't move 50% of the properties or 20% of the properties. It's way worse than an illiquid stock. So you get these. I think you get some very silly valuations placed on a lot of real estate companies by people that don't really understand what it's like to own one and try to move large quantities of property. REITs have behaved terribly in the market this year, as you know, and it's not at all inconceivable they would become a class that would get so unpopular that they would sell at significant discounts from what you could sell the properties for. And they could get interesting as a class then, and then the question is whether the management would fight you in that process, because they would be giving up their income stream for managing things, and their interests might run counter to the shareholders on that. I've always wondered about the REITs that say, our assets are so wonderful and they're so cheap, and then they go out and sell stock. I mean, there's a contradiction in that. If they say our stock at 28 is very cheap, and then they sell a lot of stock at 28 less an underwriting commission, it doesn't, there's a disconnect there. And so, but it's a field we look at. I mean, Charlie and I can understand real estate, and we would be open for very big transactions periodically. And if there was a long-term capital management situation and translated to real estate, we would be open to that. The trouble is, so many other people would be too, that it would be unlikely to go at a price that would really get us excited. Way back there.
Understanding your theory that sort of a down market is good for net savers, can you sort of give us your thoughts as to where the market's going, its downward trend, and long-term profit or long-term profit?
Well, I've got no idea where the market's going to go. I prefer it going down, but I haven't. My preferences have nothing to do with it. The market knows nothing about my feelings. That's one of the first things you have to learn with a stock. You buy 100 shares of General Motors. Now, all of a sudden, you have this feeling about General Motors. I mean, if it goes down, you may be mad at it. You may say, well, if it just go up to what I paid for it, my life will be wonderful again. Or if it goes up, you may say how smart you were and how you and General Motors have this love affair and everything. You've got all these feelings. Stock doesn't know you own it. Stock just sits there. It doesn't care what you paid. It doesn't care that you owned it or anything. So any feeling I have about the market is not reciprocated. I mean, it is the ultimate. It is very cold shoulder we're talking about here. And anybody that is going to be a net saver, practically everybody in this room is more likely to be a net buyer of stocks over the next 10 years than they are a net seller. So every one of you should prefer lower prices. I mean, if you're going to be a net eater of hamburger in the next 10 years, you want hamburger to go down unless you're a cattle producer. And if you're going to be a buyer of Coca-Cola and you don't own Coke stock, you hope the price of Coke goes down. I mean, you're looking for it to be on sale this weekend at your supermarket. You want it to be down on the weekends, not up on the weekends when you're going to attend the supermarket. Your stock exchange is a big supermarket of companies, and you're going to be buying stocks. What do you want to have happen? You want those stocks to go down, way down. And, you will make better buys then. And later on, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when you're in a period when you're dissaving or when you're heirs just saved for you after you're gone. I mean, then you may care about higher prices. But I find people, that was one of the, there's a chapter 8 in Ben Graham's Intelligent Investor about the attitude towards stock market fluctuations. And that and the chapter 20 on the margin of safety are the two most important essays ever written on investing, as far as I'm concerned. Because when I read chapter 8, when I was 19, I figured, I mean, I just figured out what I just said, but it's obvious. I didn't figure it out myself, though. It was explained to me, and I'd probably gone another 100 years if I had read it and still thought it was good when my stocks were going up. Now we want things to go down, but I have no idea what the stock market's going to do. I never do. I never will. It's not something that I think about at all. When it goes down, I look harder at what I might buy that day. Because I know there's more likely to be some merchandise there that I can use my money effectively in.
Okay, Warren, we'll take one more question from the audience.
Okay, I'll let you pick who gets it. You can be the guy.
What's the question? You're right back there. If you live it again, study your life again, then what would you like to do to have a happier life?
Yeah, I would say, and this is going to sound disgusting. The question is, what would I do if I were going to live over again and have a happier life? Well, the only thing I might do is select a gene pool where people live to be 120 or something that I came from. But I've been extraordinarily lucky. I mean, I use this example. I'll take a minute or two because I think it's worth thinking about a little bit. Let's just assume that it was 24 hours before you were born, and a genie came to you, and he said, Herb, you look very promising, and I've got a big problem. I've got to design the world in which you're going to live. And he said, I've decided, the hell with it, it's too tough. You design it. So you've got 24 hours. You figure out what the social rules should be, the economic rules, the governmental rules, and you're going to live under those, and your kids are going to live under them, and their kids are going to live under. And you say, I can design anything? And Genie says, yeah, you can do it. And you say, well, there must be a catch. He says, well, there is a catch. You don't know whether you're going to be born black or white, rich or poor, male or female, infirm or able-bodied, bright or retarded. All you know is you're going to take one ball out of a barrel that's got 5.8 billion. You're going to participate in what I call the ovarian lottery. You're going to get one ball out of there. And that is the most important thing that's ever going to happen to you in your life, because that is going to control whether you're born here or in Afghanistan, or whether you're born with an IQ of 130 or an IQ of 70. It's going to determine a whole lot. And you're going to go out of the world, and you're going to have that ball. Now, what kind of a world do you want to design? Well, I think that's a good way to look at social questions, because not knowing which ball you're going to get, you're going to want a ball that you're going to want a system, design a system that's going to produce lots of goods and services, because you're going to want people on balance to live well. And you're going to want it that produces more and more, so your kids live better than you do and your grandchildren live better than the kids. But you're also going to want a system that, if it does produce lots of goods and services, does not leave behind a person that accidentally got the wrong ball and is not well wired for this particular system. See, I'm ideally wired for the system I fell into here. I mean, I came out and I got something that enables me to allocate capital. You know, nothing so wonderful about that. If all of us were stranded on a desert island, you know, we all landed there and we're never going to get off of it, the most valuable person would be the one that could raise the most rice, you know, over time. And you know, I could say, well, I can allocate capital. How about paying me? And you wouldn't get very excited about that. So I am in the right place. I mean, Gates says if I'd been born, you know, a few million years ago, I'd been some animal's lunch. You know, he says you can't run very fast, you can't climb trees, you can't do anything. You've just been chewed up in the first day. So he says you're lucky you were born today, and I am. But the question, getting back, one question you can ask yourself, incidentally, is here is this barrel with 5.8 billion balls, everybody in the world. If you could put your ball back, and they gave you, and then they took out at random 100 other balls, and you had to pick one of those, would you put your ball back in? Now, those 100 balls that you're going to get out, roughly 5 of them will be American. So there's 95 versus 5. So you're only going to have 5 balls. If you want to be in this country, you're only going to have 5 balls now left. You know, half of them are going to be women, half of them are going to be men. I'll let you all decide how you vote on that one. Half of them are going to be below average intelligence, half are going to be above. I mean, do you want to put your ball back? Most of you, I think, will not want to put that ball back to get 100. So what you're saying is I'm in the luckiest 1% of the world right now, sitting in this room, top 1% of the world. Well, that's the way I feel. I mean, I've been lucky to be born where I was, because it was 50-1 against me in the United States when I was born. Lucky with parents, lucky with all kinds of things, and then lucky to be wired in a way that in a market economy pays off like crazy for me. It doesn't pay off for somebody who's absolutely as good a citizen as I am, you know, leading Boy Scout troops, teaching Sunday school, whatever, raising fine families, but he just doesn't happen to be wired in the same way I am. So I've been extremely lucky, so I would like to be lucky again. And if I'm lucky, then the way to do it is to play out that game and do something you enjoy, you know, all your life, and be associated with people you like. I only work with people I like. You know, I don't. If I could make it $100 million by buying a business with some guy that caused my stomach to churn, I'd say no, because I say that's just like marrying for money, which probably isn't a very good idea in any circumstances. But if you're already rich, it's crazy, right? So I am not going to marry for money. So I would really do almost exactly what I've done, except I don't think I'd have bought the U.S. Air. Thanks.